The doctor dropped the clipboard on the metal table, and the sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. He looked at my ex-wife. Then he looked at me, and finally he looked at the DNA results trembling in his hand. "This is medically impossible," he whispered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You need to explain this right now." My ex-wife Vanessa, who had spent 30 years treating me like a stray dog she regretted feeding, suddenly went pale beneath her layers of expensive makeup. 2 hours earlier she had told me my genes were garbage. She had told me I was only there to pay the bill. But that piece of paper didn't care about her money or her lies. It only cared about the truth. And the truth was about to destroy the fake empire she had built on my sorrow. My name is Ezekiel Robinson, but everyone who knows the difference between a spark plug and a piston calls me Zeke. I am 73 years old. I am a retired Marine and a man who spent 50 years scrubbing engine grease out of his fingernails. I don't have a mansion. I don't have a portfolio of stocks. What I have is a 1978 Ford F-150 that runs smoother than a Swiss watch and a heart that has been broken more times than my knuckles. Before I tell you how I brought a corrupt family to its knees with nothing but a blood test, I want to know where you are listening from. Let me know in the comments. And if you have ever been underestimated because of your bank account or the color of your collar, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is for us. It started on a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that feels heavy with humidity and bad memories. I was in my garage, the only place on earth where things made sense. If a carburetor is broken, you fix it. If a gasket leaks, you replace it. Machines don't lie to you. Machines don't promise to love you forever and then serve you divorce papers the day you get laid off. I was tightening the bolt on the alternator of my truck when the phone buzzed on the workbench. It was a burner phone. I only kept it for emergencies, and only 3 people had the number. One was my doctor. The other 2 were my twin sons, Marcus and Darius, but they hadn't called me in 3 years. I wiped my hands on a rag and picked it up. The name on the screen made my stomach turn over. Vanessa, my ex-wife, the woman who had taken full custody of my boys when they were 10 years old, claiming I was unfit because I couldn't afford private tutors and tennis lessons. I hadn't heard from her since the day she told me to stay away from the boys' graduation because I would embarrass them with my cheap suit. I swiped the screen. There was no greeting, no hello, just 3 sentences that froze the blood in my veins. Marcus has leukemia. He is dying. Do not come to the hospital unless you have money. I stared at the screen until the backlight flickered and died. Marcus, my boy. The one who used to sit on my lap and steer the truck while I worked the pedals. He was dying and his mother was treating his life like a transaction. I didn't cry. Men from my generation, men who walked through the jungles of Vietnam and came back to work double shifts in Detroit steel mills, we don't cry when the world ends. We get to work. I put the phone in my pocket. I didn't reply. What was there to say to a woman who thought a father's love was a line item on a budget sheet? I walked into my small house. It was clean, quiet, and empty. I went to the closet and pulled out the black suit bag. It was the same suit I wore to my mother's funeral. It smelled of mothballs and cedar. I put it on. The pants were a little loose around the waist now, and the jacket was tight in the shoulders, but it was clean. I tied my tie with hands that were steady, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I went to the bathroom sink and scrubbed my face. I looked at the old man in the mirror. Gray hair, deep lines etched around the eyes, dark skin that had weathered 73 winters. Vanessa always said I looked rough. She said I looked like a laborer. Today I didn't care what I looked like. I only cared that I was a father. I locked the house and got into my Ford. The engine roared to life, a deep guttural sound that usually soothed me, but today it sounded like a growl. I drove. I drove out of my neighborhood past the boarded-up storefronts and the potholes and headed toward the skyline that glittered in the distance. Mount Sinai Hospital. It was in the part of the city where the police cars were new and the streets were swept every morning. It was Vanessa's world. A world of glass and steel and people who looked through you if you weren't wearing the right watch. I pulled up to the main entrance. A valet in a red vest stepped forward, looked at my truck, and hesitated. I didn't wait for him to open the door. I stepped out, tossed him the keys, and walked past him before he could sneer. The automatic door slid open and the smell hit me. Antiseptic floor wax and money. The lobby looked more like a 5-star hotel than a hospital. There was a grand piano in the corner and a waterfall cascading down a marble wall. I marched straight to the reception desk. My boots clicked loudly on the polished floor. The woman behind the desk was young, with glasses perched on the end of her nose and a headset covering one ear. She didn't look up when I stopped in front of her. She was typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I waited. I counted to 3. I learned patience in the trenches, waiting for the rain to stop, waiting for the enemy to move. I could wait for a receptionist. Finally, she stopped typing and looked up. Her eyes scanned my old suit, my calloused hands resting on the counter, and the determined set of my jaw. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice flat. "I am here to see Marcus Robinson," I said. My voice was deeper than I expected, rough like gravel. "He is in the oncology wing." She sighed, a small sound of irritation, and turned back to her screen. "Name Ezekiel Robinson. I am his father." She typed. Click, click, click. Then her hand stopped. She frowned. She tapped the enter key, again harder this time. Then she looked at me, and the boredom in her eyes was replaced by a look I knew well. It was the look of a gatekeeper finding a reason to lock the gate. "I'm sorry, Mr. Robinson," she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming professional and cold. "I cannot issue you a visitor pass." "Why not?" I asked. I didn't raise my voice. I leaned in closer. "My son is dying upstairs. Why can't I see him?" "There is a flag on his file," she said, pointing to her screen as if that explained everything. "A strict no-visitor list approved by the primary guardian, Mrs. Vanessa St. James. Your name is specifically highlighted in red, sir. It says here that you are barred from contact due to..." She squinted at the screen. "Potential emotional distress to the patient. Emotional distress." The words felt like a slap. Vanessa, she knew I would come. She knew I wouldn't ignore the text. She wanted me here, but she wanted me to crawl. She wanted me to beg. She wanted to remind me that even though I helped make that boy, even though I held him when he had fevers and taught him how to throw a baseball, I was nothing. I was just the donor. I was just the past she wanted to erase. I gripped the edge of the counter. The marble was cold under my fingers. "Listen to me, miss," I said, and this time the steel from the factory was in my voice. "I drove an hour to get here. I have a text message from his mother telling me to come. You can call her down here or you can call security, but I am not moving from this spot until I see my son." The receptionist looked at me. She saw the scar above my left eyebrow. She saw the way my knuckles turned white. She saw that I wasn't a man who was going to walk away because a computer screen told me to. She swallowed hard and reached for the phone. "I will call the nurses' station on the VIP floor," she said nervously. "But if Mrs. St. James says no, security will escort you out. Do you understand?" "Call her," I said. I stood there surrounded by the luxury of a hospital built for the wealthy, feeling like an intruder in my own life. I watched people walk by in designer clothes, holding bouquets of flowers that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. They looked happy. They looked safe. They didn't know that upstairs a young man was fighting for his life while his mother played power games in the lobby. I closed my eyes for a second and saw Marcus. Not the grown man who hadn't spoken to me in 3 years, but the 10-year-old boy crying in the back seat of Vanessa's Mercedes as she drove him away. "Daddy, fix it," he had screamed. "Daddy, fix it." I couldn't fix it then. I didn't have the money for lawyers. I didn't have the status to fight Vanessa's high-powered legal team, who painted me as an unstable, angry black man. But I was here now, and I wasn't leaving. The receptionist hung up the phone. She looked pale. "Mrs. St. James is coming down," she whispered, "and she is bringing security." "Good," I said. "Let them come." I turned around to face the elevators. My heart was pounding, but my feet were planted wide-grounded. I was a Marine. I was a father. And I was about to walk into a war zone armed with nothing but my love for a son who had been taught to be ashamed of me. I didn't know it then, but the war I was about to fight wouldn't be won with fists or money. It would be won with blood. And the secret flowing in my veins was about to blow the roof off this entire hospital. The elevator doors slid open with a soft, expensive chime that sounded nothing like the clanking metal lifts in the parking garages I was used to. A woman stepped out, and the air in the corridor instantly changed. It wasn't just the blast of air conditioning, it was her. She brought a cloud of perfume with her, something heavy and floral that smelled like vanilla and entitlement. I knew who she was immediately, even though we had never shaken hands. I had never sat across a dinner table from her. I had never even heard her voice except for once in the background of a voicemail Marcus left me by mistake 2 years ago. Her name was Tiffany. She was my daughter-in-law. I stood up from the hard plastic chair, my knees popping with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet hallway. I watched her walk. She moved with the confident, rhythmic click-clack of high heels that had never touched a dirty sidewalk. She was wearing a cream-colored dress that looked like it cost more than the transmission I had rebuilt last week. She was clutching a designer handbag against her side like a shield. I remembered her face from the photos. Not photos sent to me in the mail. No, I didn't get those. I remembered her from the pictures my neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, had shown me on her iPad. She had found them on social media. I remembered staring at the screen, looking at my son Marcus in a tuxedo, smiling at this woman under a canopy of white roses at a vineyard in Napa Valley. I remembered searching the background of those tiny digital photos, looking for a familiar face, looking for myself, even though I knew I wasn't there. I wasn't invited. Vanessa had told Marcus that my presence would be confusing for the guests. She said I wouldn't fit in with Tiffany's family, who came from old money and politicians. So I stayed home that day. I waxed my truck. I drank a beer. And I imagined giving a toast I would never get to deliver. Now here she was. The woman who slept beside my son every night, the woman who had helped erase me from his life. I stepped into her path. I didn't mean to be aggressive, but I am a big man. Even at 73, I take up space. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said. The words came out rusty. She stopped abruptly, nearly losing her balance on those thin heels. She looked up from her phone, her eyes scanning me from my scuffed work boots to the collar of my outdated suit. Her expression didn't hold fear. It held something worse. It held annoyance. It was the way you look at a stain on a silk tablecloth. She wrinkled her nose, and I realized with a jolt of shame that she could smell the auto shop on me. No matter how much I scrubbed with industrial soap, the scent of oil and old metal never really left my skin. To me, it smelled like honest work. To her, it smelled like failure. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was sharp-clipped. She didn't ask it like she wanted to help. She asked it like she wanted me to move. "I am Ezekiel," I said, standing tall. "I am Marcus's father." For a second, her face went blank. Then a slow, cruel smile spread across her lips. It wasn't a smile of recognition, it was a smile of disbelief. "Oh. You." She let out a short, dry laugh that had no humor in it. "Vanessa said you might show up. I honestly didn't think you would have the audacity." I looked at the closed doors of the intensive care unit behind her. "Is he awake?" I asked. "I need to see him." Tiffany stepped sideways, placing herself physically between me and the doors. She crossed her arms over her chest, the diamonds on her wrist catching the fluorescent light. "Look, Mr. Robinson, is it? We are dealing with a very delicate situation here. Marcus is surrounded by the best specialists in New York. He is resting. The last thing he needs right now is to be agitated by a family reunion that is about 20 years too late." I felt the heat rising up the back of my neck. "I didn't come for a reunion," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I came because his mother texted me. She said he is dying. She said he needs a donor." Tiffany rolled her eyes. Of course she did. Vanessa likes to cover all her bases. "But let's be realistic. Look at you." She gestured vaguely at my entire existence. "You are a retired mechanic, right? You probably have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and God knows what else. We need a viable match, not a liability. Besides, this is the VIP wing. We pay a premium for privacy and sanitation. You are creating a scene just by standing here." I took a step closer. The grief I had been holding back was starting to turn into anger. It was a cold, hard anger, the kind that helped me survive the jungles in '68. "I am his father," I said quietly. "My blood is his blood. You can hate me. You can look down on me, but you cannot change biology. Biology isn't everything," she snapped, her voice rising. "It takes more than DNA to be a parent. It takes money. It takes support. Where were you when we bought our house? Where were you when Marcus got his promotion? You were nowhere. And now that there is a tragedy, you show up playing the concerned patriarch. Please, spare me the drama. We don't need your money, which I assume you don't have, and we certainly don't need your guilt." I bit the inside of my cheek. I wanted to tell her about the checks I sent every month that Vanessa returned unopened. I wanted to tell her about the savings bond I bought the day the twins were born, which Vanessa cashed out and spent on a spa weekend. But I knew she wouldn't believe me. To her, I was just the villain in the story Vanessa had told. "Fine," I said. "If you don't want my help, then where is his brother? Where is Darius? He is the identical twin. He is the perfect match. Why isn't he in that room, giving his bone marrow?" The question hung in the air. Tiffany shifted her weight. She looked away for the first time, her gaze darting to the floor. "Darius isn't available," she muttered. "Not available," I repeated. "My son is lying in that room with his immune system shutting down, and his twin brother is not available. Is he sick? Is he dead?" "No," she hissed, looking back at me with defensive fire in her eyes. "He is in Europe. He and his girlfriend have been planning this trip to the Amalfi Coast for 6 months. They are on a yacht. Okay, we haven't been able to reach him yet. The signal is spotty." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. A yacht. In Europe. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Marcus is dying. He has maybe 48 hours. And Darius is drinking wine on a boat. He doesn't know how bad it is," she shouted, forgetting to whisper. "And even if he did, he can't just snap his fingers and teleport back to New York. These things take time. That is why we are waiting. We are managing. We don't need you waltzing in here trying to play the hero just because our primary plan is delayed." I looked at this woman. I looked at the fear beneath her anger. She wasn't just mean, she was terrified. But she was more terrified of losing her social standing, of having the wrong kind of family member seen in the hallway, than she was of her husband dying. And Darius, my other boy, the boy I had named after a king. He was sipping champagne while his other half withered away. They had built a life so full of luxury and comfort that they had forgotten how to survive. They had forgotten what loyalty meant. I took a deep breath. The smell of her expensive perfume was making me nauseous. "You are right," I said. "I am just a mechanic. I fix broken things. And from where I am standing, this whole family is broken." I brushed past her. She gasped and grabbed my arm. "You can't go in there. Security is on their way." I shook her hand off. It was light and weak like a bird's claw. I didn't push her. I just kept walking. "I am not leaving," I said over my shoulder. "And if Darius is too busy watching the sunset in Italy to save his brother, then you are stuck with the mechanic." I reached for the handle of the double doors. My hand was shaking, not from age, but from the sheer force of the will it took to keep from screaming. I pushed the doors open. I was stepping into the belly of the beast. I was about to face Vanessa. But the anger that Tiffany had ignited in me was now a fuel. It burned hot and clean. They thought I was trash. They thought I was useless. They were about to find out that trash is the only thing that doesn't burn when you throw it in the fire. I walked into the sterile white light of the ICU, ready to bleed for a son who didn't even know my name. The air in the corridor seemed to drop 10 degrees. I didn't need to turn around to know she was there. I felt it in the way the nurses straightened their scrubs and the way Tiffany suddenly stopped trying to block my path and stepped back, smoothing her dress like a nervous schoolgirl. I turned slowly, my boots squeaking faintly on the linoleum. And there she was. Vanessa. 30 years ago, she was the most beautiful woman in our neighborhood. She had a smile that could light up a rainy Tuesday and a laugh that made you believe everything was going to be all right. But the woman standing at the end of the hallway wasn't that girl. This woman was a masterpiece of modern medicine and cold ambition. Her skin was pulled tight, smooth and flawless, frozen in a permanent expression of haughty surprise. Her hair was a cascading wave of expensive extensions. She was wearing a white pantsuit that looked sharp enough to cut glass, and on her arm was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a boardroom. He was white tall, with silver hair and a tan that came from a bottle or a private island. Richard. I knew him from the tabloids. He was a hedge fund manager, a man who moved money around for a living while I moved steel. He looked at me with a vague, polite curiosity, the way you look at a zoo animal that has wandered out of its cage. But Vanessa looked at me with pure, distilled poison. She let go of Richard's arm and walked toward me. The sound of her heels was a slow, deliberate drumbeat of war. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough for me to see the microscopic scars of her facelifts close enough for me to smell the icy mint on her breath. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She looked at my suit, the one I had worn to bury my mother, and a small, cruel smirk touched the corner of her injected lips. "Ezekiel," she said. Her voice was lower than I remembered, husky from years of expensive scotch and screaming at assistants. "I see you got my text. I told you to bring a checkbook, not your physical presence. We are planning a funeral here, not a family reunion." I held her gaze. I didn't blink. "I am not here for a funeral, Vanessa. I am here to save our son." She laughed. It was a sharp barking sound that made Richard shift uncomfortably behind her. "Save him? With what?" She took a step closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear the venom dripping from every syllable. "Look at you. You are a relic, Zeke. You are a walking, talking reminder of everything I escaped. You think you can help Marcus. You are the problem. You are the reason he is weak." I felt my hands ball into fists at my sides, but I kept them buried in my pockets. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Your genes," she hissed. "Your weak, poverty-stricken, recessive genes. Why do you think he is sick? Why do you think he is lying in that bed hooked up to machines? It is because of the biology you gave him. I spent 30 years trying to scrub the failure out of this family. I gave them the best schools, the best clothes, the best connections. I married a man," she gestured to Richard, "who understands what it means to be elite. But I couldn't change their DNA. I couldn't change the fact that half of them came from a man who cleans grease off his hands with a rag." She poked a manicured finger into my chest. It felt like a knife. "Do not think for 1 second that your blood is going to save him. Your blood is the reason he is dying. You are a genetic dead end, Ezekiel, a failure. So do us all a favor. Go back to your garage. Go back to your little life. I texted you so you could start saving for the casket because that is the only contribution you are capable of making." The hallway was silent. Tiffany was staring at the floor. Richard was checking his watch, clearly bored by the domestic squabble of people he considered beneath him. The nurses were pretending to work, but I knew they were listening. Every word Vanessa said was designed to break me. She knew exactly where to hit. She attacked my manhood, my legacy, and my love for my children in 3 sentences. I looked at her. I really looked at her. And for the first time in 30 years, I didn't see the woman I had once loved. I didn't see the mother of my children. I saw a stranger. I saw a woman who was so terrified of her own past, so desperate to prove she was better than where she came from, that she had turned into a monster. She hated me because I was the mirror she couldn't break. I was the proof that she hadn't always been a queen. I took a deep breath. I let the anger wash over me and then drain away, leaving only cold resolve. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call her names. I spoke with the calm authority of a man who has faced death before and isn't afraid of a little plastic surgery. "Are you finished?" I asked. Vanessa blinked, surprised that I wasn't shouting, surprised that I wasn't crying. "Because while you are standing here giving speeches about genes and money, our son is running out of time," I continued. "You said Darius is not here. You said he is in Europe. That means there is no donor. That means Marcus has 0 options." Vanessa crossed her arms. "We will find a donor on the registry. We have the money to expedite the search. We don't need you." "The registry takes weeks," I said, stepping past her to look at the doctor who had just emerged from the patient's room. "Weeks that Marcus does not have. You know that. I know that. And the doctor knows that." I turned to the doctor. He was a tall man with tired eyes holding a clipboard like a shield. "Doctor," I said, "my name is Ezekiel Robinson. I am the biological father. I understand that the twin brother is unavailable. I am volunteering to be the donor. I want to be tested. Now." The doctor looked at me, then at Vanessa. He saw the tension. He saw the expensive suit facing off against the worn-out one. But he also saw a man who was willing to bleed for his patient. "Mr. Robinson," the doctor said cautiously, "given your age and the typical compatibility rates for parents, it is a long shot. Usually a parent is only a 50% match at best. Ideally, we need a sibling." "I know the odds," I interrupted. "I was a Marine. I know about long shots. But 50% is better than 0%. And 0 is what you have right now." Vanessa stepped between us, her face flushing red beneath the makeup. "I forbid it," she screeched, losing her composure. "I am the primary guardian on his medical proxy. I do not want this man touching my son. He is unclean. He is unfit." The doctor adjusted his glasses. Actually, Mrs. St. James, while you are the proxy for medical decisions, you cannot prevent a willing adult from being tested for compatibility. If Mr. Robinson wants to give a blood sample for HLA typing, that is his right, and frankly, given the patient's rapid decline, we would be negligent if we didn't test every immediate family member available. Vanessa looked like she had been slapped. She spun around to Richard, looking for backup. Richard, do something. Call the lawyers. Richard cleared his throat. Vanessa, darling, he said, his voice smooth and disinterested. If the boy is dying and the ex-husband wants to get poked with a needle, let him. It won't work anyway. Like you said, the genes are bad. Let him fail. Then he can leave and we can handle this properly. Vanessa stared at her husband, then back at me. Her eyes narrowed into slits. She saw the logic in his cruelty. Let me try. Let me fail. Let me be crushed by the science just like she said I would be. It would be the ultimate victory for her. To prove once and for all that I was biologically useless. Fine, she spat. Test him. Stick him with as many needles as you want. And when the results come back incompatible, when the science proves that you are nothing but a waste of space, I want you to leave this hospital and never come back. I want you to sign away your parental rights forever. I looked her dead in the eye. Deal, I said. I didn't hesitate. I didn't wait for her to change her mind. I rolled up the sleeve of my jacket, exposing the faded tattoo of an anchor on my forearm. The skin was loose now, but the muscle underneath was still there. Show me where to go, Doc, I said. As I followed the doctor down the hall, leaving Vanessa and her entourage in the lobby, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't fear. It was certainty. Vanessa called my genes a failure. She called my blood recessive. But she forgot one thing. I was a survivor. I had survived war. I had survived poverty. I had survived losing her. And my blood. My blood was survivor's blood. It didn't know how to quit. And as I walked into the testing room, I prayed that for once in my life the universe would let the underdog win. I sat down in the chair, extended my arm, and watched the dark red life flow into the vial. It was the same color as hers. It was the same color as Marcus's. But unlike theirs, mine wasn't for sale. And that made all the difference. The waiting room was a cage wrapped in velvet and marble. For the next hour, the only sound was the click of Vanessa's heels as she paced back and forth, wearing a trench into the expensive carpet. She was checking her phone every 30 seconds, tapping out furious messages to Darius, to her assistants, to anyone who could make the world spin the way she wanted it to. Richard, her husband, sat in the corner reading a Wall Street Journal, looking as detached as if he were waiting for a flight at an airport lounge. And I sat there still and silent as a stone, my hands clasped between my knees, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in a long time. I watched the clock on the wall. Each tick was a second taken away from my son's life. I knew about countdowns. I had lived through them in bunkers while mortar shells rained down, and I had lived through them in the ICU when my mother passed. But this was different. This was a countdown I couldn't fight with a rifle or a wrench. Then the double doors swung open. It wasn't a nurse this time. It was the man in charge, Dr. Eris Thorne. He didn't look like a man bringing good news. He walked with a heavy, purposeful stride, his white coat billowing slightly behind him. He looked tired, the kind of tired that coffee doesn't fix. He stopped in front of us, and for a moment he just looked at the three of us, the frantic mother, the bored stepfather, and the old mechanic. He took a breath that seemed to pull all the oxygen out of the room. Mrs. Saint. James, Mr. Robinson, he began, his voice low and serious. We have a problem. Vanessa stopped pacing immediately. She snapped her phone shut. What kind of problem? Is he awake? Did the steroids work? The doctor shook his head slowly. Marcus is not responding to the initial stabilization protocol. His white blood cell count has skyrocketed in the last hour. We are looking at an accelerated blast crisis. To put it simply, his body is shutting down faster than we anticipated. We don't have a week. We don't even have 3 days. He paused, letting the weight of the numbers settle on us. We have maybe 48 hours. If we don't perform the transplant within that window, his organs will begin to fail, and at that point he will be too weak for the procedure. Vanessa went white. 48 hours. She grabbed Richard's arm for support. But Darius isn't here yet. We haven't heard from him. He is in the middle of the Mediterranean, Even if he flies back now with the layovers and the travel time, he won't make it in time to be prepped. Dr. Thorne finished the sentence for her. If we wait for Darius, we lose Marcus. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. My boy was dying because of a vacation. He was dying because his brother, the other half of his soul, was too busy living the high life to answer a phone call. It was a cruel joke. The twin bond, the magical connection everyone always talked about, had been severed by a spotty Wi-Fi signal on a yacht. Vanessa looked around the room wildly as if the solution was hiding behind a potted plant. There has to be another way, she demanded, her voice rising to a shriek. Check the registry again. Pay someone, I don't care what it costs. Find a donor. The registry takes weeks to clear, Dr. Thorne said calmly but firmly. And buying a donor is illegal and impossible in this time frame. We need a match now. Today. I stood up. My knees creaked, but my legs were steady. I didn't look at Vanessa. I looked straight at the doctor. Take mine, I said. The room froze. Vanessa slowly turned her head to look at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disgust. What did you say? She whispered. I said, take mine. I repeated, my voice filling the empty space of the room. I am his father. I am here. I am ready. Test me, prep me, and take whatever you need. Bone marrow, blood, a kidney. I don't care. Just save him. For a second, I thought she might hit me. Instead, she threw her head back and laughed. It was a jagged, ugly sound that echoed off the marble walls. You. She pointed a manicured finger at me, shaking with laughter that was bordering on hysteria. You think you can save him? Ezekiel, look at yourself. You are 73 years old. You have a history of high blood pressure. You eat fried food and breathe exhaust fumes for a living. Your body is a wreck. She turned to the doctor, her eyes blazing. This is a joke, right? You can't seriously consider him. He is old. His health is garbage. If you put him on that table, he will probably die. And even if he doesn't, his marrow is probably so full of toxins and age that it will kill Marcus faster than the cancer. I stood my ground. I didn't defend my diet. I didn't defend my age. I knew I wasn't an athlete. I knew my heart had a murmur, but I also knew that I was the only option standing in this room. I am still breathing, Vanessa, I said quietly. And unlike Darius, I am here. You are here to cause trouble, she screamed. You are selfish. You just want to play the hero so you can hold it over our heads later. Doctor, tell him. Tell him he is too old. Tell him his genes are trash. Dr. Thorne didn't laugh. He didn't look at me with disgust. He looked at me with calculation. He looked at the size of my shoulders and the steadiness of my hands. Then he looked at Vanessa. Mrs. Saint. James, please lower your voice, he said, his tone sharpening. This is a hospital, and actually you are incorrect. Vanessa's mouth snapped shut. Excuse me. He turned to me. Mr. Robinson, are you aware of the risks? At your age, the recovery will be brutal. The anesthesia alone is a risk factor. It will be painful. I survived caisson doc, I said. I think I can handle a needle. Dr. Thorne nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. If he is a match, even a half match, we can proceed immediately. We can start the conditioning chemotherapy on Marcus tonight and harvest the marrow tomorrow morning. Vanessa looked like she was choking. She looked from the doctor to me, her face twisting in a battle between her hatred for me and her fear for her son. She didn't want me to be the one. She didn't want to owe me anything. She wanted me to be useless so she could keep her narrative intact, the narrative where I was the deadbeat and she was the savior. But the clock was ticking, and she heard it too. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she clutched her expensive handbag. She looked at Richard, but he just shrugged, signaling that he wanted no part of this decision. She was alone. Fine, she spat the word out like it tasted like poison. Fine. Test him. She took a step toward me, invading my personal space until I could see the heavy layers of powder on her face. But listen to me, Ezekiel, she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. I am agreeing to this because I have no choice. But if you screw this up, if your old weak heart gives out on the table and complicates things, or if your marrow isn't good enough and Marcus rejects it, I will destroy you. She poked my chest again. I will sue you until you don't even have that rusty truck to sleep in. I will bury you in legal fees so deep you will wish you had died in that war you always talk about. Do you understand me? I will turn you into dust. I looked down at her. I saw the fear behind the threat. I saw a mother who was losing control and lashing out at the only target she had left. You can take the truck, Vanessa, I said softly. You can take the house. You can sue me until I'm in the ground. I don't care about any of that. Just let me save my boy." She stared at me for a long moment, searching for fear in my eyes. She didn't find any. She pulled back, sneering. "Get him out of my sight," she told the doctor. "Go draw his blood, and pray that he isn't as useless as he looks." Dr. Thorne gestured for me to follow him. I walked away from her without looking back. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I felt a heavy, somber duty. I was walking toward the pain, toward the needles, toward the risk. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt like a father again. I wasn't just a mechanic. I wasn't just an ex-husband. I was the last line of defense. And as I rolled up my sleeve again in the sterile light of the exam room, I hoped that my blood, the blood she hated so much, was strong enough to do what her money couldn't. I hoped it was strong enough to perform a miracle. Because if it wasn't, Vanessa was right. I would be the one killing my son. The rubber tourniquet snapped tight around my bicep, pinching the skin. It was a familiar kind of pressure. I had spent 50 years working with hoses, belts, and clamps that held things together when they wanted to burst apart. The young nurse tapped the inside of my elbow with a gloved finger, searching for a vein. She didn't have to look hard. My veins were thick and rope-like road maps of a life spent lifting heavy steel and turning rusted bolts. They were the veins of a man who worked with his hands, the kind of hands Vanessa used to say were too rough to hold a baby. "Make a fist," the nurse said, her voice flat and bored. She was just doing a job. She didn't know that she was about to drain the history out of me. I squeezed my hand into a fist. As the needle pierced my skin, a sharp sting that radiated up my shoulder, the white walls of the hospital room seemed to dissolve. I wasn't in New York anymore. I was back in Detroit. I was 38 years old and I was exhausted. I closed my eyes and I could smell it. The scent of molten metal and industrial coolant. It was 1989. Vanessa and I had been married for 5 years. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. But the house was too quiet. Vanessa wanted children. She wanted them with a desperation that consumed her. She would sit at the kitchen table and cry because her friends were having baby showers and she was staring at negative pregnancy tests. She told me she was broken. She told me she was barren. She told me that without a baby she wasn't a real woman. So I did what a husband does. I stepped up. We went to the fertility specialists. The doctors in white coats who spoke in Latin and charged in gold. In vitro fertilization, IVF, even the name sounded expensive. They gave us the odds and they gave us the bill. It was more money than I made in 2 years. We didn't have insurance that covered it. We didn't have a trust fund. We had my paycheck from the auto plant and a dream. I took the night shift. Then I took the weekend shift. Then I started picking up overtime in the loading docks on my days off. I worked 3 shifts a day, sleeping in the cab of my truck for 4 hours between jobs, eating cold sandwiches from gas stations. I missed birthdays. I missed holidays. I destroyed my back and inhaled enough metal dust to coat my lungs in gray. But every Friday I brought the check to Vanessa. I put it in her hand, my fingers stained with grease, and she would kiss me and call me her hero. She would say, "Zeke, this is for our future. This is for our family." I paid for every hormone injection. I paid for every ultrasound. I paid for the procedure that implanted the embryos. And when the twins were born, when I held Marcus and Darius in my arms for the first time, their skin wrinkled and crying, I looked down at them and thought, I bought this. I paid for this happiness with my sweat and my spine. I own this joy. But I was wrong. I didn't own anything. The needle in my arm shifted, pulling me back to the present for a second before the memories dragged me down again. The tube was filling with dark red blood. I remembered the day the money stopped. The auto industry took a hit. Layoffs came down like a guillotine. I lost my job at the plant. I came home, my head hung low, ready to tell my wife that we needed to tighten our belts, that we needed to be a team. But Vanessa didn't want a teammate. She wanted a provider. And when the provider stopped providing, the wife stopped loving. The divorce wasn't a separation, it was an eviction. She found a lawyer who specialized in shark attacks. She told the court that I was unstable. She told them that my exhaustion was aggression. She took one single moment where I slammed a door in frustration after an 18-hour shift, and she painted a picture of a monster. Domestic disturbance, her lawyer called it. Potential for violence. I sat in that courtroom wearing the same suit I was wearing now and watched the judge nod. I watched Vanessa weep fake tears into a silk handkerchief. She had the kids, she had the house, and because of the child support payments, she demanded she had my future earnings too. She looked at me across that aisle, and her eyes were dry and cold. She had gotten what she wanted: the sperm, the money, the babies. The husband was just the delivery system, and now that the package had arrived, the delivery system was discarded trash. I lost custody. I lost visitation rights. I was reduced to a check in the mail. And eventually, when the boys were old enough to understand her version of the truth, I lost them too. They stopped coming to the phone. They stopped answering my letters. They grew up believing that their father was a dangerous, angry failure who abandoned them. They didn't know I was working double shifts at a new garage just to pay for their private schools. They didn't know I was eating ramen noodles so they could have lacrosse equipment. Mr. Robinson. The nurse's voice cut through the fog of my memory. I opened my eyes. She was staring at the computer screen attached to the rolling cart. Her brow was furrowed. The vial of blood was full-capped with a purple top sitting on the tray. But she wasn't labeling it yet. She was looking at my file. "Is something wrong?" I asked. My voice was raspy. She hesitated. She looked from the screen to me, then back to the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "I am entering your information into the donor database to run the cross-match against the patient Marcus St. James," she said slowly. "But there is a discrepancy in the patient's history file." "What discrepancy?" I asked, sitting up straighter. She turned the monitor slightly away from me, as if trying to protect me from the glare. "In the patient's birth records and the intake forms provided by his mother, under the section for biological father, it is blank." I stared at her. Blank. It says, "unknown." She clarified her voice, dropping to a whisper. "Mrs. St. James listed the father as an anonymous donor on the original medical history forms when he was admitted." My heart hammered against my ribs, harder than it had when Vanessa insulted me in the hallway. Unknown. Anonymous donor. She hadn't just divorced me. She hadn't just taken the kids. She had erased me. In the official medical record of my son's life, I didn't exist. She had rewritten history to make herself the Virgin Mother, the sole creator. She wanted the world to believe that Marcus and Darius had no father, that they sprang from her will alone. The nurse looked at me with pity. It was the kind of pity you give to a confused old man who has wandered into the wrong room. "Sir," she said gently, "are you sure you are the biological father? If you are just a stepfather or an adoptive figure, this test, well, the compatibility is highly unlikely. We don't want to waste resources or give you false hope if there is no biological connection." I looked at the vial of blood on the tray. It was dark, rich, and real. It was the only truth in this building. Vanessa could lie to the courts, she could lie to the boys, she could lie to the hospital registry, but she couldn't lie to the blood. I looked the nurse in the eye. The anger in my chest wasn't hot anymore. It was cold. It was heavy. It was the weight of 35 years of silence. "I am not a stepfather," I said, "and I am not anonymous." I reached out and tapped the vial of blood with my thick, calloused finger. "I worked 3 shifts a day to pay for the procedure that made him." I said, my voice low and steady like a rumbling engine. "I paid for the doctors. I paid for the hospital room. I held him before his mother did. She might have filled out the forms, miss, but I filled out the check. And I gave the seed." The nurse swallowed hard. She saw the pain in my eyes, but she also saw the iron. She didn't ask any more questions. She typed something into the computer, overriding the system. "Okay, Mr. Robinson," she said softly. "I will send this down to the lab stat. We are running a full HLA typing." "How long?" I asked. "Usually it takes 4 hours," she said, "but I will mark it as emergency priority. We should know something sooner." She picked up the vial and labeled it Ezekiel Robinson, father. I watched her walk out of the room. I sat there alone, holding a piece of cotton to the inside of my elbow. The physical pain was nothing. It was a pinprick. The real pain was knowing that upstairs my son was dying with a file that said he had no father. Vanessa thought she had won. She thought that by leaving that box blank she had cut me out of the equation forever. But she forgot one thing. Biology doesn't read paperwork. Biology reads the code written in the marrow, and that code was about to scream my name louder than she ever could. I rolled down my sleeve, buttoned my cuff, and prepared to wait. I had waited 35 years for vindication. I could wait a few more hours. But as I sat there, a thought crept into my mind. a dark, twisting thought. If she had lied about the father, what else had she lied about? Why was she so afraid of this test? Why did she look so terrified when I volunteered? It wasn't just hatred, it was fear. Pure, unadulterated panic. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. The blood was out of my body now. It was in the machine, and the machine was about to tell a story that Vanessa St. James had spent a lifetime trying to bury. The clock on the wall was a cheap plastic circle that hummed every time the second hand swept past the 12. I had watched it go around 240 times. 4 hours. In the world of medical testing, time is a language. I knew this language. When my mother had cancer, the results that were good came back quick. The doctors would hustle in smiling, waving papers, eager to share the victory. When the results were bad, they dragged their feet. They held meetings. They checked and double-checked because nobody wants to be the messenger of death. 2 hours is the standard for an HLA cross-match. It's a chemical reaction. It either fits or it doesn't. It's like a key in an ignition. You turn it and the engine roars or it stays silent. But we were pushing into the 4th hour and the silence in the waiting room was heavy enough to crush a man. Vanessa had stopped pacing. She was sitting on a leather sofa scrolling through her phone with a manic intensity. She wasn't looking up medical journals. She wasn't looking up prayers. She was looking up caterers. I heard her whispering to Richard about rescheduling a charity gala. That was Vanessa. Even in the face of death, she was worried about her social calendar. She assumed that whatever was happening behind those double doors was manageable with a checkbook or a phone call. She didn't understand that biology doesn't care about your net worth. Richard was asleep. His head was tipped back against the wall, his mouth slightly open. He was the picture of a man who was merely enduring an inconvenience. To him, Marcus was just a stepson, a liability, an emotional expense he had married into. And Tiffany. She was pacing where Vanessa had left off, her heels clicking a nervous rhythm. She kept looking at the doors, then at me, then back at the doors. Every time her eyes landed on me, her lip curled. She wanted me gone. She wanted this whole ugly chapter of poverty and old age to be scrubbed from the shiny narrative of her life. I sat with my hands on my knees. My arm throbbed where they had taken the blood. A small bruise was blooming under the cotton ball, a purple flower of pain. I didn't mind the pain. I minded the doubt. Why was it taking so long? Had they found something in my blood? Was Vanessa right? Was I too old? Was my marrow poisoned by 50 years of steel dust and cheap whiskey? The fear started to creep up my throat, tasting like bile. If I couldn't save him, if I was useless, then everything Vanessa had said about me for 30 years was true. I wasn't a father. I was just a failure. Then the doors opened. The sound was sudden and sharp. We all jumped. Vanessa stood up so fast, she dropped her phone. Tiffany spun around. Richard snorted awake, blinking in confusion. Dr. Thorne walked out. But he didn't walk like a man who had answers. He walked like a man who had seen a ghost. He was pale. Not just tired, but drained of color. His face was gray like wet ash. He was holding a file folder against his chest, clutching it with both hands as if he were afraid it might fly away. He stopped in the middle of the room. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice shrill and demanding. "Well, it's about time. We have been waiting here for half a day. Is he a match or not? Tell me so we can move on to the next option. I already have a private jet on standby to fly in a specialist from Switzerland. If this..." She waved a dismissive hand in my direction. "If this fails..." Dr. Thorne didn't answer her. He didn't even look at her. He was looking at me. His eyes were wide, fixed on my face. He was studying me, searching my features, looking at the line of my jaw, the shape of my nose, the color of my skin. It was an intense, unblinking stare that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't a look of judgment. It was a look of disbelief. It was the look a mechanic gives an engine when he opens the hood and finds something that shouldn't be there. "Dr. Thorne." Vanessa snapped, stepping into his line of sight. "I am talking to you." The doctor blinked as if waking from a trance. He slowly turned his head toward Vanessa, but his eyes kept darting back to me. He took a deep breath and I saw his chest rise and fall unsteadily. "Mr. Robinson," he said. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. It wasn't the booming voice of authority he had used earlier. It was a whisper. I stood up. "I am here, Doc. Just give it to me straight." "Is it a no?" He licked his lips. He looked down at the file in his arms, then back up at me. "Mr. Robinson, I need you to come with me to my private office. Vanessa let out a scoff of disbelief. His office. Why just tell him he is too old and let him go? We don't need a counseling session, Mrs. St. James, the doctor said, cutting her off. His tone was sharp now, brittle. I need you to come as well, immediately. Me. Vanessa frowned. She looked at Richard, then at Tiffany. Why? What is going on? Is Marcus okay? Did something happen to the donor sample? Please, just follow me. The doctor turned on his heel and started walking back toward the double doors. He walked fast, urgent. I stepped forward to follow him. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Something was wrong. This wasn't a rejection. A rejection you deliver in the waiting room with a sad smile and a handshake. A private meeting means complications. A private meeting means secrets. Vanessa hurried after him, her heels clacking loudly. She was muttering under her breath, annoyed at the drama, annoyed at being ordered around. Tiffany, sensing that something big was happening, hiked up her designer bag and started to trot after us. She wasn't going to be left out of the loop. She was the wife. She was the next matriarch. As we reached the doors, Dr. Thorne stopped abruptly. He turned around and put a hand up, stopping Tiffany in her tracks. Not you, he said. Tiffany blinked, offended. Excuse me, I am his wife. I have a right to know what is happening with my husband's treatment. This meeting is not about the treatment protocol, Dr. Thorne said. His voice was hard, leaving no room for argument. This is about the genetic results. It is a matter of extreme sensitivity regarding biological lineage. He looked at me then, at Vanessa. I only need the biological parents, he said. The word hung in the air. Biological. He said it with a strange emphasis, a weight that I didn't understand at the time. Tiffany opened her mouth to argue, her face flushing red with embarrassment. Vanessa, tell him! Vanessa waved her hand impatiently. Stay here, Tiffany. It is probably just some liability waiver because of Ezekiel's age. I'll handle it. Just call the pilot and tell him to keep the engine running. Vanessa pushed through the doors, her chin held high, confident that she was walking into a negotiation she would win. I paused at the door. I looked at Tiffany. For the first time all day, she didn't look superior. She looked shut out. She looked like a little girl who hadn't been invited to the party. I walked through the doors. The hallway beyond was bright and sterile. Dr. Thorne was waiting for us. He didn't speak. He just gestured for us to follow him down a long corridor. We walked in silence. The only sound was the squeak of my boots and the click of Vanessa's heels. The air felt thinner here. It felt charged with electricity. We reached a door at the end of the hall. It was heavy oak, different from the other hospital doors. Dr. Thorne opened it and ushered us inside. It was a large office lined with books and diplomas. There was a large mahogany desk and a computer screen glowing with complex charts and graphs. Sit down, he said. He didn't offer us water. He didn't offer a polite preamble. He walked behind his desk and sat down heavily as if his legs could no longer support him. Vanessa sat on the edge of the leather chair, crossing her legs. She checked her watch. Doctor, really? The suspense is unnecessary. Just tell us the old man isn't a match so we can get back to saving my son. Dr. Thorne didn't look at her. He was staring at his computer screen. He typed a few keys and 2 images appeared on the large monitor mounted on the wall. They looked like ladders, colorful bars of DNA sequencing. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I have been a hematologist for 30 years, he began, his voice low. I have performed thousands of transplants. I have seen rare blood types. I have seen genetic mutations. He looked up at me. But I have never seen this. My stomach dropped. What is it, I asked. Is my blood sick? Do I have cancer too? No, Mr. Robinson, he said. You are healthy. Surprisingly healthy for your age. Your heart is strong. Your marrow is producing cells at a rate we usually see in men 20 years younger. Vanessa scoffed. Wonderful. He is a healthy peasant. Does that make him a match? Dr. Thorne turned to her. His eyes were cold now. Cold and hard. We ran the standard HLA typing, he said. Usually we look for 6 markers. A parent is usually a half match sharing 3 out of 6. That is biology. You get half from the mother, half from the father. He pointed to the screen. Mr. Robinson is a match, he said. A very good match. In fact, he is a perfect haploidentical donor. The compatibility is 50%. Down to the decimal. It is textbook. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Thank God, I whispered. I slumped back in the chair, relief washing over me like warm water. I could do it. I could save him. So, let's get on with it, Vanessa said, standing up. Why the drama? Why the private meeting? If he is a half-match, prep him. Sit down, Mrs. St. James. Dr. Thorne barked. The command was so sudden and forceful that Vanessa actually sat back down, stunned. The problem is not Mr. Robinson, the doctor said. The problem is the cross-match. He tapped the keyboard again. A third ladder appeared on the screen. It was red, and it was completely different from the other two. When we prepare for a transplant, we have to map the entire genetic structure to ensure there are no inherited diseases that could complicate the graft, he explained. We have the son's DNA, we have the father's DNA. And because we needed to be thorough, we pulled your genetic profile from the hospital records on file from your gallbladder surgery last year. He looked at Vanessa. The room went deadly silent. We ran the comparison, Dr. Thorne said. We ran it once. The machine flagged an error. We thought it was contamination, so we drew a fresh sample from Marcus. We ran it again. Same error. We recalibrated the machine. We ran it a third time. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. Mrs. St. James, he said, his voice trembling slightly, this is medically impossible, but the numbers do not lie. What are you saying? Vanessa whispered. Her face was starting to lose its composure. The mask was cracking. I am saying, Dr. Thorne said, pointing at the screen, that Mr. Robinson provided 50% of Marcus's DNA. That is confirmed. He is the biological father. He paused. But you provided nothing. 0%. There is no genetic match between you and the patient. Not a single marker. Vanessa froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Dr. Thorne's voice dropped to a whisper that sounded like a scream in the quiet room. Biologically speaking, Mrs. St. James, you are not the mother of that boy. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing us inside Dr. Thorne's private office. The silence in that room was different from the silence in the hallway. Out there it was the quiet of a hospital, broken by the beeping of machines and the squeak of rubber soles. In here, it was the silence of a courtroom, right before the gavel comes down. The air was thick, recycled, and smelled faintly of old paper and leather. It was a room where decisions were made, where lives were weighed on a scale, and today that scale was sitting on the mahogany desk in front of us. Dr. Thorne walked around the desk and sat down. He didn't look at us immediately. He adjusted his glasses. He moved a stack of files 2 inches to the left. He was stalling. I knew that look. It was the look of a man who held a grenade in his hand and was deciding where to throw it. Vanessa didn't wait. She couldn't stand the quiet. To her, silence was a vacuum that needed to be filled with her voice, her authority. She sat on the edge of the leather guest chair, her back rigid, her hands clutching her designer bag like a weapon. She looked at the doctor. Then she shot a glance at me, a glance full of pity and triumph. Well, doctor, she said, her voice cutting through the heavy air like a serrated knife. Let's get this over with. I can see it on your face. It's bad news, isn't it? She didn't wait for an answer. She turned to me, her eyes gleaming. I told you, Ezekiel. I told you not to get your hopes up. She shook her head, feigning sadness. You pushed for this. You insisted on being the hero. And now look, you've just wasted everyone's time. Your genes are, well, let's be honest. They are damaged goods. You've worked in filth your whole life. You eat garbage. You live in stress. Did you really think your marrow was going to be pure enough for my son? She let out a short, sharp breath. It's okay. I'm not angry. I'm just disappointed that we had to go through this charade. Doctor, just say it. Tell him he's not a match so he can leave and we can get back to finding a real solution. I sat there gripping the armrests of my chair. Her words were like acid designed to corrode my spirit. Part of me believed her. Part of me was terrified that she was right. I was 73. I was tired. Maybe I was too broken to fix anything. I looked at the floor, bracing myself for the rejection. I was ready to take the hit. I was ready to stand up, apologize for existing, and walk out of my son's life forever. Dr. Thorne cleared his throat. It was a loud, deliberate sound. Mrs. St. James, he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Please stop talking. Vanessa blinked, her mouth hanging open mid-sentence. Excuse me, doctor. Thorne turned his chair slightly facing the large monitor mounted on the wall. He pressed a key on his keyboard. The screen flickered to life, illuminating the dim office with a harsh blue light. Two complex charts appeared side by side. They looked like ladders, colorful rungs stacked on top of each other. To a layman, they were just lines. To a hematologist, they were the map of a human soul. He picked up a laser pointer. A red dot appeared on the left chart. This, he said, circling the image, is the genetic profile of the patient Marcus Robinson. He moved the dot to the chart on the right. And this, he continued, is the genetic profile of the donor, Mr. Ezekiel Robinson. He turned to face us. He took off his glasses and set them on the desk. Mrs. St. James, you seem to be under the impression that Mr. Robinson is a biological liability. You called his genes garbage. You assumed that his age and his lifestyle would render his marrow useless. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. Well, isn't it true? Look at him. Dr. Thorne ignored her. He looked directly at me. Mr. Robinson, he said, his voice softening. In my 30 years of practice, I have performed thousands of screenings. Finding a haploidentical match, a half-match parent, is usually a game of percentages. We hope for a 50% compatibility. We hope the immune systems don't attack each other too violently. It is usually a messy, complicated fit. He leaned forward. But you, sir, you are not just a match, you are a phenomenon. I lifted my head. What? The doctor pointed at the screen again. Your HLA markers, the proteins that tell the immune system who is a friend and who is an enemy, align with your son's on a level I rarely see. Your bone marrow is incredibly robust. Your stem cell count is higher than men half your age. Biology doesn't care about your bank account, Mr. Robinson. It cares about vitality. And your blood is strong. It is compatible with Marcus in the most perfect way a father's blood can be. He paused, letting the words sink in. We can proceed with the transplant immediately. In fact, I would bet my career that your marrow is the best chance Marcus has of surviving this night. For a moment, the world stopped spinning. The weight that had been pressing down on my chest for 3 years, the weight of being the outcast, the failure, the deadbeat, suddenly evaporated. I wasn't useless. I wasn't garbage. I was the cure. I was the answer. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. I didn't cry. I just let out a long, shuddering breath. I looked at the screen at the colorful ladder of my own DNA, and I saw redemption. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you, God. I turned to look at Vanessa. I expected to see relief. I expected to see a mother happy that her dying son had a lifeline. But I didn't see relief. I saw shock. And beneath the shock, I saw fury. This is impossible, she stammered, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. You checked it wrong. The machine is broken. He can't be a perfect match. He's him. Dr. Thorne's expression hardened. The machine is not broken, Mrs. St. James. The science is absolute. Mr. Robinson is the biological father, and he is the donor we have been praying for. Vanessa stood up, her hands trembling. No, I don't accept this. I want a second opinion. I want another test. You are risking my son's life on a fluke. Sit down. Dr. Thorne's voice cracked like a whip. Vanessa froze. She had never been spoken to like that. Not by staff, not by anyone. She slowly lowered herself back into the chair, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. We are not done, the doctor said. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous register. I looked at him. The joy that had just flooded my heart began to cool. The expression on Dr. Thorne's face hadn't changed. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating the match. He looked more troubled than before. If I am a match, I asked, leaning forward, then what is the problem? Why do we need to be in here? Let's go prep the surgery. Dr. Thorne looked down at his hands. He took a deep breath as if he were preparing to deliver a death sentence. The problem isn't you, Mr. Robinson, he said slowly. The problem is the control sample. Control sample, Vanessa asked, her voice shrill. What are you talking about? Dr. Thorne typed another command on his keyboard. A third chart appeared on the screen. It was distinct, sharp, and completely different from the first two. When we run these tests, he explained, looking at the wall, we have to cross-reference everything to ensure there are no hidden genetic disorders. We need a complete map of the patient's lineage. We have the father's map. It fits perfectly. He turned his chair to face Vanessa directly. His eyes bored into hers. Naturally, we ran your profile against Marcus's as well, Mrs. St. James, just to be thorough, to check for maternal antibodies. Vanessa stiffened. Her face went from red to a ghostly white in the span of a second. Why you didn't need to do that? I'm not the donor. No, you are not, Dr. Thorne said, and that is where the anomaly lies. Anomaly, I asked. I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. What kind of anomaly? Dr. Thorne didn't look at me. He kept his eyes locked on Vanessa. I ran the test 3 times, he said softly. I recalibrated the sequencer. I thought someone had swapped the vials. I thought there was a contamination, because what I was seeing was medically impossible for a natural birth. He pointed to the 3rd chart, Vanessa's chart. There is no overlap, he said. The room went so quiet I could hear the hum of the computer fan. What do you mean, no overlap? I asked, looking between the doctor and my ex-wife. I mean, Dr. Thorne said, enunciating every syllable, that while Mr. Robinson shares 50% of his DNA with the patient confirming paternity, Mrs. St. James shares 0. He let the word hang there. 0. Vanessa, he said, his voice devoid of judgment but heavy with fact. You are not the biological mother of Marcus Robinson. I stared at him. My brain couldn't process the words. Not the mother. But I was there. I was in the delivery room. I held her hand while she screamed. I saw the babies come out of her body. I cut the cords. How could she not be the mother? That's a lie, Vanessa screamed. She jumped to her feet, knocking her chair over. It hit the floor with a deafening crash. You are lying. I gave birth to him. I have the stretch marks to prove it. I labored for 12 hours. How dare you sit there and tell me he isn't mine? Dr. Thorne didn't flinch. He remained seated, calm and immovable as a mountain. I am not saying you didn't give birth to him, Mrs. St. James, he said quietly. I am saying that biologically, genetically, you are a stranger to him. He looked at me and his eyes were full of a strange mixture of pity and revelation. Mr. Robinson, 35 years ago you and your wife underwent IVF, correct? I nodded, my mouth dry. Yes. She had trouble conceiving. Dr. Thorne nodded. It appears, he said, turning back to the trembling woman standing over her fallen chair, that Mrs. St. James did not use her own eggs. She used a donor. A donor she never disclosed to you. She carried the child. She gave birth to the child. But the egg, the genetic blueprint, it belonged to another woman. I looked at Vanessa. She was standing there panting, her chest heaving. She wasn't looking at the doctor anymore. She was looking at the floor. And in that moment, the mask didn't just crack. It shattered. The arrogance was gone. The superiority was gone. All that was left was a terrified woman who had been caught in a lie she had been protecting for 3 decades. Vanessa, I whispered. She didn't answer. She couldn't answer. The silence in the room wasn't judicial anymore. It was the silence of a tomb. The tomb where she had buried the truth, and I had just kicked down the door. The room felt like it was shrinking. The air, already thick with the smell of old leather and tension, seemed to be sucked out by the black hole of Dr. Thorne's words. I looked at Vanessa. For 30 years, this woman had walked through life with the confidence of someone who owned the pavement beneath her feet. She had dictated the terms of my marriage, my divorce, and my relationship with my sons. She had wielded her motherhood like a sword, cutting me out of the picture with surgical precision. But now she looked like a statue made of sand, crumbling in a gale-force wind. Dr. Thorne didn't blink. He didn't offer a tissue. He was a scientist, and he was presenting data. He pointed the laser at the screen again, at the red ladder of DNA that stood alone, isolated from the others. Mrs. St. James, he said, his voice steady and unyielding. I understand this is shocking. I understand that it contradicts your lived experience, but genetics is not a matter of opinion. It is a matter of code. He tapped the screen. When we prepare for a transplant of this magnitude, we don't just look for a match. We look for hidden enemies. We run a cross-match to rule out inherited diseases, things like mitochondrial disorders or recessive traits that could wake up and attack the new immune system. To do that, we need to map the entire genetic highway of the patient. Half the road comes from the father. Half comes from the mother. He looked at me, giving a small, almost imperceptible nod. Mr. Robinson's half of the highway is clear. It is mapped. It is verified. He provided the 50% that makes him the father. That is indisputable. Then he turned his gaze back to Vanessa, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. But when we tried to map the other half, the machine flagged an error. It kept searching for your markers, Mrs. St. James. It was looking for the genetic signature that a mother passes to her child. It looked for your eye color, your blood type, your susceptibility to certain enzymes. It searched millions of data points. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. It found nothing. Vanessa let out a strangled sound like a gasp trapped in her throat. "That is insane," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am his mother. I raised him. I breastfed him. I sat by his bed when he had chickenpox. You cannot tell me I am not his mother." Dr. Thorne leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over the file. "I am not talking about nurturing Mrs. St. James. I am not talking about who signed the report cards or who paid for the braces. I am talking about biology. I am talking about the egg that started life in a petri dish 35 years ago." He picked up a piece of paper from the file and slid it across the mahogany desk. It stopped right in front of Vanessa's clutching hands. "We ran the test 3 times, he said softly. "We used 3 different samples. We even used a backup sequencer in the pathology lab because I didn't believe the first result myself. But the numbers are consistent. You do not share a single segment of DNA with Marcus Robinson, not one. If I were to look at these charts blindly without knowing the names, I would say that you and the patient are complete strangers." I watched Vanessa. I watched the denial warring with the truth behind her eyes. She stared at the paper on the desk, but she didn't touch it. It was as if the paper was radioactive. If she touched it, the lie she had lived for 3 decades would burn her alive. "I gave birth to him." She screamed suddenly, her voice cracking with hysteria. She slammed her hand on the desk, making the lamp rattle. "I was there. I remember the pain. I remember the epidural. I labored for 12 hours in that hospital room. Ezekiel was there. Ask him." She spun around to face me, her eyes wild and desperate. "Tell him, Zeke. Tell him I gave birth to those boys. Tell him I am their mother." I looked at her. I saw the sweat beading on her forehead, cutting through the heavy makeup. I saw the terror of a woman who was watching her entire identity dissolve. "Yes," I said slowly, my voice rough. "You gave birth to them, Vanessa. I was there. I saw it." She turned back to the doctor, a triumphant sneer twisting her lips. "See, he admits it. I gave birth. So stop with this nonsense and fix your machine." Dr. Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't look impressed by her outburst. He looked sad. "Mrs. St. James," he said gently, "giving birth makes you the gestational carrier. It means you carried the pregnancy. It means you delivered the infant. But in the world of in vitro fertilization, carrying a child and being the genetic parent are 2 very different things." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. 35 years ago, when you went to that clinic, did you use your own eggs?" The room went dead silent. Vanessa froze. Her mouth, which had been open to shout another denial, snapped shut. Her eyes darted to the left, then to the right, avoiding the doctor's gaze, avoiding my gaze. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. She stammered. It was a long time ago." "It is a simple question," Dr. Thorne pressed. "Did you undergo ovarian stimulation to harvest your own oocytes? Or did you receive a donor egg?" Vanessa's face crumbled. The arrogance, the anger, the entitlement, it all melted away, leaving behind a frightened, cornered animal. She slumped back into her chair, her shoulders shaking. "I couldn't," she whispered. Her voice was so small I could barely hear it. "What was that?" Dr. Thorne asked. "I couldn't," she cried out, tears finally spilling over her lashes and cutting tracks through the powder on her cheeks. "My eggs were bad. The doctor said they were too old, too fragile. He said I would never conceive on my own. He said if I tried, I would just have miscarriage after miscarriage." She looked up at me then, and for the first time in 30 years, she looked at me with something resembling guilt. "I wanted a baby, Zeke. I wanted it so bad. It was all I ever wanted. And when the doctor told me I was broken, I couldn't tell you. I was ashamed. I thought if you knew I was barren, you would leave me. I thought you would find a woman who could give you a family naturally." I stared at her, stunned. "You thought I would leave you, Vanessa? I worked 3 jobs for you. I sold my grandfather's watch to pay for the first round of treatments. I would have walked through fire for you." I didn't know that she sobbed. I was scared, so when the doctor suggested a donor, I said yes. I told him to find the best. I told him to find someone who looked like me, someone smart, someone beautiful. She turned back to Dr. Thorne, pleading now, but I carried them. I grew them inside me. My blood nourished them for 9 months. Doesn't that count for anything? Doesn't that make me their mother? Dr. Thorne sighed. In the eyes of the law and in the eyes of love, yes, you are their mother. But in the eyes of this disease, in the eyes of the bone marrow transplant that needs to happen in the next 4 hours, no, it counts for nothing. He stood up and walked over to the screen, turning off the image of the red, mismatched ladder. Your immune system is not their immune system, Mrs. St. James. If we were to use your marrow, Marcus's body would recognize it as a foreign invader instantly. It would attack it, or worse, the graft would attack him. It would kill him. He turned back to face us. That is why we are here. That is why this conversation is happening. Because for the last 3 years you have blocked Mr. Robinson from seeing his sons based on the narrative that he was the outsider, that he was the one who didn't belong. But the biological reality is the exact opposite. He pointed at me. He is the only link Marcus has to life. He is the only one who shares the code. You might have carried the boys, Vanessa, but Ezekiel is the one who made them. I sat there trying to process the magnitude of the lie. She had used a donor egg. She had known from the very beginning that she had no biological claim to the twins, yet she had spent a lifetime projecting her own insecurity onto me. She had called my genes garbage. She had called me a failure. She had mocked my heritage and my intelligence, claiming the boys got their good qualities from her side of the family. It was all a projection. Every insult she hurled at me was really an insult she was afraid to turn on herself. She hated me not because I was unworthy, but because I was the only real parent in the room, and she knew it. She had to destroy me to feel secure in her own counterfeit motherhood. And then a darker thought hit me. "Wait," I said, my voice cutting through her sobs. "If you used a donor egg, and I provided the sperm..." I looked at her, and the pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with the force of a sledgehammer. "That's why you got full custody, isn't it?" Vanessa flinched. "You knew," I said, standing up. My legs felt heavy, but my rage was lifting me up. "You knew that if the court found out the truth that I was the biological father and you were essentially a surrogate who had no genetic relation, you might lose. So you painted me as a monster. You invented the abuse, you invented the anger issues. You had to make me look dangerous so the judge wouldn't look too closely at the DNA. I didn't..." She stammered, but her eyes gave her away. She was terrified. "You destroyed my life," I said, my voice rising. "You took my sons away. You let them grow up thinking I was a deadbeat. You let them be ashamed of me. And all this time, you were the fraud." Vanessa buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The sound filled the small office, a pathetic, broken noise that offered no comfort. Dr. Thorne watched us for a moment, then checked his watch. "Mr. Robinson," he said quietly, "I am sorry for the pain this revelation has caused, but we are running out of time. The conditioning chemotherapy needs to start within the hour if we want to harvest your marrow tomorrow morning. We need to move." I looked at the weeping woman in the chair, the woman who had been my wife, the woman who had been my tormentor. I felt a strange hollowness in my chest. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate requires respect, and I had none left for her. I just pitied her. She had built a castle on a foundation of lies, and now the tide had come in. I turned to the doctor. "Let's go," I said. "My son is waiting." I walked toward the door. I didn't look back at Vanessa. I left her there with her expensive handbag and her shattered truth. She had the money. She had the mansion. She had the social status. But in that room with the cold blue light of the computer screen fading to black, she had nothing. She was just a stranger who had borrowed a life she didn't own. And I was the father who was going to take it back. The room spun. Not literally, but the ground beneath my feet felt like it had dissolved into quicksand. I looked at the woman sitting across from me. Vanessa. The woman I had shared a bed with for 15 years. The woman who had screamed in labor while I held her hand. The woman who had nursed our children. Dr. Thorne's words were still hanging in the air, heavy and suffocating. A donor egg. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry as dust. I looked at the doctor, searching for a sign that this was a mistake, a cruel joke. But his face was stone. He wasn't joking. He was solving a medical puzzle, and the final piece was a betrayal so deep it eclipsed everything else. "Wait," I finally managed to whisper. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "You are saying she used someone else's egg?" Dr. Thorne nodded slowly. "Biologically, yes. In cases where the mother has viable uterus function but compromised ovarian reserve donor oocytes are used. The sperm fertilizes the donor egg in the lab, and the resulting embryo is implanted in the carrying mother. The child grows inside her, but the genetic blueprint, the eyes, the hair, the blood type, the immune system comes from the egg donor and the father." He looked at Vanessa. "In this case, Mrs. St. James, you provided the womb. You provided the environment, but you did not provide the seed." Vanessa let out a scream. It wasn't a word. It was a raw, primal sound of denial. She slammed her hands onto the mahogany desk, knocking over a cup of pens. "Liar," she shrieked, her face twisting into a mask of pure terror. "You are a liar. I am their mother. I felt them kick. I breastfed them until they were 2 years old." "How dare you sit there and tell me I am nothing to them? I am not saying you are nothing," Dr. Thorne said calmly, though he leaned back slightly to avoid her flailing hands. "I am saying you are not a genetic match. And right now, genetics is the only thing that matters, because your son needs a transplant, and your immune system would kill him." I looked at Vanessa, really looked at her. And suddenly the memory of 1989 came flooding back, clear as day. I remembered the fertility clinic. It was a cold, sterile place in downtown Detroit. I remembered how Vanessa insisted on going to the appointments alone. "Zeke, you work too hard," she would say, kissing my cheek. "I can handle the consultations. You just rest." I thought she was being considerate. I thought she was trying to save me from the stress. I remembered the day she came home with the news that we were going to try IVF. She had been crying, but they were tears of relief. She told me the doctor said my sperm was fine, but her eggs were weak. She never said gone. She never said useless. She just said we needed a little help. And then there was the money, the endless bills. She handled all the paperwork. She signed all the consent forms. She told me where to sign, usually just an X on the bottom line, while she held the paper folded over so I couldn't read the fine print. "Trust me, Zeke," she would say. "It's just legal mumbo-jumbo." I trusted her. God help me, I trusted her with my life. "Vanessa," I said, my voice rising, cutting through her hysterics. "Did you buy an egg?" She froze. She looked at me, her eyes wild, her chest heaving. I, she stammered. "Did you buy an egg?" I roared, standing up. The chair flew back and hit the wall. She shrank back, terrified. I had never raised my voice to her like that, not once in our marriage. But the rage inside me now wasn't just anger. It was the explosion of 35 years of being played for a fool. "I had to," she sobbed, collapsing into herself. "I had to, Zeke. The doctor said I was empty. He said my ovaries were premature. They were dried up. I was 28 years old, and I was barren." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining the expensive foundation, revealing the scared, manipulative woman underneath. "Do you know what that feels like? To be a woman who can't do the one thing she is supposed to do? I felt like a failure. I couldn't tell you. You wanted a family so bad. You talked about teaching your son to play baseball. You talked about it every night. If I told you I couldn't give you a child, you would have left me. So you lied," I asked, trembling. "You lied for 35 years. I didn't lie. I fixed it." She screamed, desperate to justify herself. "I found a donor, a top-tier donor. She was a model, Zeke. She was smart. She was beautiful. She was everything I wanted to be. I paid extra for her. I did it for us. I wanted our babies to be perfect." "You did it for you," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You did it so you could play the part. You wanted the baby shower. You wanted the attention. You wanted to be the mother." And then the darkest realization hit me, the realization that made my knees weak. "That's why you hated me, isn't it?" Vanessa wiped her nose with the back of her hand, sniffling. "What? You hated me because I was the real one," I said. "All these years. You called me trash. You called me a deadbeat. You told the boys I was useless. You did everything you could to keep them away from me. You weren't protecting them from me. You were protecting your secret." I took a step toward her. "You knew that if I got close to them, if I spent time with them, I might see it. I might see that they didn't look like you. I might see that they had nothing of you in them. You were jealous, Vanessa. You were jealous of your own husband because I was the biological parent, and you were just—" I stopped. I couldn't say the word. It was too cruel, but she heard it anyway. "I am their mother," she wailed, rocking back and forth. "I carried them. I gave birth to them. That makes me their mother." Dr. Thorne cleared his throat. It was a dry, clinical sound that brought us back to the reality of the hospital room. "Mrs. St. James," he said quietly, "your emotional bond with your sons is not in question, but your biological deception has created a medical crisis. Because you concealed the donor's identity, we have no medical history for the maternal side. We don't know what diseases she might have carried. We are flying blind." He looked at the computer screen. "But we have the father. And because Mr. Robinson is the biological father, his marrow is the only thing that bridges the gap. He is the anchor." Vanessa looked up at the doctor. Her eyes were red and swollen. She looked old. For the first time she looked her age. The glamour was gone. The power was gone. "So," she whispered, "I can't save him." "No," Dr. Thorne said. "You can't." Vanessa looked at her hands. Her manicured fingernails were digging into her palms. She looked defeated. She looked small. All that money, she muttered to herself. All those connections. All those lies. And I can't do anything. She looked at me. There was no hatred in her eyes anymore. Only shame. Deep, burning shame. "Zeke," she said softly, "I'm sorry." I looked at her. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her she was a monster. I wanted to list every birthday I missed, every lonely Christmas, every night I sat awake wondering why my boys didn't love me. I wanted to make her pay. But I looked at the clock on the wall. Time was running out. Marcus was dying. "Save your apology," I said, turning away from her. "Save it for the boys. If Marcus wakes up, you can tell him the truth. You can tell him who he really is." I looked at Dr. Thorne. "Let's go, Doc. Let's get that marrow." Dr. Thorne nodded and stood up. He opened the door. As I walked out, I looked back at Vanessa one last time. She was sitting alone in the doctor's office, surrounded by the wreckage of her own life. She had tried to buy perfection. She had tried to buy a legacy. But in the end, she couldn't buy the one thing that mattered. She couldn't buy the blood. I walked down the hallway, my head high. I was Ezekiel Robinson. I was a mechanic. I was a poor man. But I was a father, and for the first time in 35 years, nobody could take that away from me. The heavy oak door didn't just open. It slammed against the wall with a violence that made the framed diplomas rattle. We all turned. Standing in the doorway was Darius. He looked like a ghost who had just stepped off a yacht. He was wearing white linen pants and a pale blue shirt unbuttoned at the top, showing off a chest that had seen too much sun and not enough work. He was holding a leather weekender bag, and his face was flushed, covered in a sheen of sweat that smelled of international travel and panic. He was breathless, his chest heaving up and down, but it wasn't the run from the elevator that had winded him. It was what he had heard from the hallway. The door had been thin enough. The screaming had been loud enough. Darius stood there, his eyes wide, darting from the weeping woman in the chair to the doctor, and finally landing on me. For years, Darius had looked at me with the same sneer his mother wore. He had looked at me like I was a stain on the family portrait. But today there was no sneer. There was only the hollow, terrified look of a child who wakes up in a house that isn't his own. He dropped his bag. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, the sound of a gavel ending a trial. "Mom," he whispered. His voice was cracked dry. Vanessa looked up. Her face was a ruin of mascara and tears. She reached out a trembling hand toward him, desperate for an ally, desperate for someone to validate the lie she was drowning in. "Darius, baby," she sobbed. "You're here. Thank God. Don't listen to them. They are trying to confuse us. They are trying to hurt me." Darius didn't move toward her. He took a step back as if she were contagious. "I heard you," he said. His voice was gaining strength, trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "I was standing right outside. I heard you scream it. You said you bought an egg." Vanessa froze. The hand she had reached out curled into a claw. "Darius, listen to me," she pleaded, her voice rising in pitch. "It's complicated. It was a medical decision. I did it for you. I wanted you to be perfect." "So it's true?" Darius asked, cutting her off. He walked into the room, ignoring the doctor, ignoring me. He stood over his mother, looking down at her as if he were seeing a stranger. "You aren't my mother." Vanessa flinched. I am your mother. I raised you. I was the one who drove you to tennis camp. I was the one who got you into Yale. I did everything. But you didn't make me, Darius said. The realization was washing over him cold and brutal. All my life you told me I was special because I was a St. James. You told me the reason I was smart, the reason I had talent was because of your family line. You told me Dad was just... He glanced at me, then quickly looked away, unable to hold my gaze. You told me Dad was a genetic mistake. You said we were lucky we took after you. You said his blood was thin, weak, common. He laughed, then a short, hysterical sound that was terrifying to hear. But it was all a lie. You were the one with no connection. You were just renting space. Dr. Thorne stepped forward then. He didn't want the situation to devolve into violence. He was a man of science, and he needed to ground this emotional explosion in facts. Mr. Robinson, the doctor said calmly, addressing Darius. I know this is a shock, but we need to be clear about the biological reality because it affects your brother's life. Darius turned to the doctor. Does Marcus know? Not yet, Dr. Thorne said, but he will. And here is what you need to understand. You and Marcus are monozygotic twins, identical. You came from the same fertilized egg that split in two. The doctor pointed to the screen where the lonely red ladder of Vanessa's DNA still sat unmatched and isolated. If Marcus is the product of a donor egg and Mr. Ezekiel Robinson's sperm, then so are you. Your genetic code is identical to your brother's, which means you also share 50% of your DNA with your father. Dr. Thorne paused, letting the weight of the next sentence build. And 0% with Mrs. St. James. Darius looked at the charts. He looked at the science that stripped away 30 years of superiority. Dr. Thorne continued, his voice devoid of malice but heavy with truth. In medical terms and in legal terms regarding lineage, Mrs. St. James acted as a gestational carrier. She was a surrogate. She carried her husband's children. She gave birth to her husband's children. But genetically, she is a biological stranger to both of you. The room went silent. The hum of the computer fan seemed to roar. A surrogate, Darius whispered. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. He turned back to Vanessa. She was huddled in the chair, weeping into her hands, looking small and defeated. The powerful matriarch who had ruled our lives with an iron fist was gone. You lied to us every single day, Darius said, his voice shaking. Every time you made a joke about Dad's intelligence. Every time you told us not to act like him. You were projecting. You were ashamed of yourself, so you made us ashamed of him. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. For the first time, I saw him see me. He didn't see the grease under my fingernails. He didn't see the cheap suit. He saw the nose that was shaped exactly like his. He saw the set of the jaw that mirrored his own. He saw the source. I stood there feeling a pain in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. It was the pain of seeing my son's world collapse. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to tell him it was okay, but I knew I couldn't. Not yet. We were strangers who shared blood, and that gap couldn't be bridged with a single hug. Darius, I said softly. He didn't answer. He just stared at me, his eyes filling with tears. I flew back. He choked out, turning his attention back to the doctor, desperate to find a purpose, desperate to do something that felt real. I flew back to give my marrow. I'm the match, right? I'm the identical twin. I'm the perfect match. Doctor, Thorne nodded. Yes, you are a perfect match. A 10 out of 10. Then take it, Darius said, his voice urgent. Take it now. I don't want to talk anymore. I don't want to think anymore. Just put me under and take it, weakened Dr. Thorne said. But there is a protocol. We have already prepped your father. His screening is complete. Yours will take hours to verify, even if we rush. Marcus is crashing now. Darius looked at me. He looked at the bandage on my arm where they had drawn the blood. He looked at the resolve in my eyes. He is the match, Darius asked the doctor. He is a haploidentical match, Dr. Thorne said. 50%. But his markers are incredibly strong. He is ready. And frankly, with the time we have left, he is the safest bet to start the conditioning immediately. Darius looked at Vanessa, who was still sobbing quietly. Then he looked at me. You came, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Vanessa told me not to come, I said, my voice steady. She told me I wasn't needed. She told me I was useless. Darius swallowed hard. I remember he whispered. I remember she told us that when we were kids. She said you didn't come to the games because you didn't care. She said you didn't pay for college because you were cheap. I paid for everything I could, son, I said. I worked 3 jobs to pay for the science that made you. I emptied my accounts for that IVF. Vanessa let out a fresh wail of misery, but Darius ignored her. He was piecing together a lifetime of deception. She stole you from us, Darius said, his voice breaking. She didn't just steal our biology. She stole our father. He walked over to the chair where Vanessa sat. He didn't touch her. He stood over her like a judge. I am going to go see my brother, he said coldly. And you are going to stay here. I don't want you in that room. I don't want you near him. If you try to come in, I will have security remove you. Vanessa looked up, her face streaked with black tears. Darius, please. No, Darius shouted, making her recoil. No more lies. You aren't the victim here, Mother. You never were. He turned to me. There was hesitation in his posture. He didn't know how to interact with me. The script he had been given his whole life had just been burned. Dad, he said. The word sounded strange, clumsy on his tongue. He hadn't used it in a decade. Come with me, he said. Marcus needs us. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked out of the office, his linen clothes fluttering around him, leaving the heavy scent of expensive cologne and tragedy in his wake. I looked at Dr. Thorne. The doctor gave me a solemn nod. I looked at Vanessa one last time. She was curled into a ball, a woman who had tried to curate a perfect life and had ended up with nothing but an empty frame. I walked out of the room. I followed my son down the hallway. He walked with my stride. He had my shoulders. He had my blood. And for the first time in his life, he knew it. The walk to the ICU felt different this time. I wasn't walking alone. I was walking with the other half of the miracle I had paid for with sweat and sacrifice. We were a front. We were a line of defense, and we were going to save the third part of us no matter what it took. Darius had his hand on the doorknob. He was halfway out of the room, ready to run toward his brother, ready to escape the suffocating air of that office. But he didn't leave. He stopped. His shoulders stiffened under that expensive linen shirt. He stopped because the sound of weeping behind him had ceased abruptly. It was like someone had flipped a switch. 1 second Vanessa was a sobbing, broken heap in the chair, begging for understanding. The next second the room was deadly silent. There were no sniffles. There was no trembling. I watched her. I watched the woman I had once worshipped. She slowly lowered her hands from her face. Her eyes were red, yes. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks in jagged black lines. But the eyes themselves, they were dry. And they were hard. The fear was gone. The desperation was gone. In their place was something cold and sharp, something that looked terrifyingly familiar. It was the look she used to give waiters when they brought the wrong wine. It was the look she gave me when I came home with grease on my shirt. It was the look of absolute, unadulterated contempt. She realized the game was over. She realized that the tears hadn't worked. Darius hadn't rushed to her side. He had looked at me, the mechanic, the failure, with awe. He had called me Dad. And that one word had snapped the last thread of Vanessa's control. If she couldn't be the victim, she would be the tyrant. If she couldn't be loved, she would be feared. She stood up. She didn't use the desk for support this time. She stood up straight, smoothing the wrinkles in her pantsuit with a sharp, aggressive motion. She looked at Darius's back, then she turned her gaze to me. So she said. Her voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was low, steady, and filled with venom. You think you won, don't you, Ezekiel? I didn't answer. I just held her gaze. You think because you provided a cup of fluid 35 years ago, you are suddenly the father of the year? She let out a dry, humorless laugh. Don't make me sick. You are nothing. You are a biological necessity, nothing more. A donor, a tool I used because I couldn't afford the anonymous sperm bank fees at the time. Vanessa, Darius shouted, spinning around from the door. His face was pale, his eyes wide with horror. Stop it. She ignored him. She stepped toward me, her finger jabbing the air. Look at you, she spat. You are wearing a suit that smells like mothballs. Your hands look like leather. You have nothing to offer those boys. Do you really think biology matters? Do you really think a few strands of DNA make a parent? She hit her own chest with her fist. I made them, she screamed. Me, I curated them. Who do you think paid for the private tutors when they were struggling in math? Me. Who paid for the tennis lessons, the piano lessons, the trips to Paris so they could be cultured? Me. Who pulled strings to get them into Yale? Me. She took another step, invading my space, her perfume cloying and suffocating. You gave them sperm, Ezekiel. That's the cheap part. That's the easy part. Any dog in the street can breed. But I gave them a life. I gave them a name that opens doors. I gave them a future. I took the raw material you provided, which was average at best, and I polished it until it shined. I turned your blue-collar potential into white-collar success. I stood there letting her words wash over me. For years, these insults would have cut me to the bone. For years, I believed her. I believed I was less than her because my paycheck was smaller. But now I saw the truth. I saw a woman who viewed her children not as people, but as products. Investments. She hadn't raised sons. She had managed a portfolio. You didn't raise them, Vanessa, I said quietly. You funded them. There is a difference. Oh, spare me the sentimental Hallmark trash, she yelled, throwing her hands up. Funding them is raising them. This is America. Ezekiel, money is the only parent that matters. Without my money, Marcus would be working in a garage just like you. Without my money, Darius wouldn't be on a yacht. He would be under a car hood. I saved them from being you. She was panting now, her face flushed, her eyes wild. She turned to Darius, expecting him to agree, expecting him to see the logic in her madness. Darius, look at him, she demanded, pointing a shaking finger at me. Look at what he is. Do you want to be that? Do you want to be ordinary? I gave you the world. I bought you the best jeans money could buy for the egg donor. I made sure you were tall. I made sure you were handsome. I made sure you didn't look like him. The room fell silent. She had said the quiet part out loud. She had finally admitted the root of it all. She had tried to breathe the blackness, the poverty, the struggle out of them. She had tried to erase me from their faces. Darius stood by the door. He wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. He was looking at his mother, but there was no recognition in his eyes anymore. The image of the loving, high society mother he had idolized for decades was dissolving, melting away like wax in a fire. Beneath the designer clothes and the surgeries, he saw the monster. He saw a woman who had lied about his origin, not to protect him, but to own him. You bought us, Darius whispered. The horror in his voice was palpable. You talk about us like we are horses you bred for a race. I made you winners, Vanessa snapped. And this is the thanks I get. You side with the loser. You side with the man who couldn't even afford to buy you a car for your 16th birthday? Darius looked down at his hands, the hands that looked just like mine. He couldn't afford a car, Darius said softly, his voice trembling. But he sent me a card. Every year. You told me he forgot. You told me he didn't care. But I found them, Mom. Last year when I was looking for my passport in your safe, I found a stack of cards. Unopened. Vanessa froze. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. He wrote to us. Darius said, looking up at her with tears streaming down his face. He wrote to us every month, and you hid them. You stole his words, you stole his love, and you replaced it with money. He shook his head slowly. I don't want your money anymore, he said. I don't want your status. It's fake. It's all fake. You aren't my mother. A mother doesn't buy her children. A mother doesn't lie to them about who they are. Darius turned his back on her. It was a slow, deliberate movement. He put his hand on the doorknob again. I am going to be with my father, he said. My real father. Vanessa gasped. No, you can't. Darius, come back here. I control your trust fund. I control your stocks. If you walk out that door, I will cut you off. Do you hear me? I will leave you with nothing. Darius didn't look back. He opened the door. You already left me with nothing, Mother, he said. You left me with no truth. He walked out. Vanessa stood there trembling with rage. She turned to me, her eyes blazing with hatred. Get out, she screamed at me. Get out of my sight. You poisoned him against me. I looked at her. I felt a strange sense of calm. The mask had fallen, and underneath there was nothing to fear. She was just a lonely, bitter woman with a checkbook and an empty heart. I didn't poison him, Vanessa, I said calmly. I just gave him the one thing you couldn't buy. What she hissed. What could you possibly give him? The truth, I said. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me I heard the sound of something shattering a vase, a lamp, maybe her own composure. It didn't matter. I walked out into the hallway, leaving the broken glass and the broken woman behind. I had a son to save, and for the first time, I had a son walking beside me. The door clicked shut behind Darius, leaving a vacuum in the room that sucked the air right out of Vanessa's lungs. She stood there staring at the wood grain where her favorite son had just walked out on her. For the first time in 30 years, her money, her influence, and her carefully constructed lies had failed to keep her children in line. She looked at Dr. Thorne, and then she looked at me. Her eyes were wide, frantic, darting around like a trapped animal looking for a gap in the fence. I could see the gears turning in her head. She was trying to calculate a way out, trying to find an angle, a bribe, or a threat that would put her back on top. But Dr. Thorne didn't give her the chance to regroup. He walked back to his desk, not to sit down, but to pick up a thick stack of documents. He held them with a weight that felt heavier than paper. He looked at Vanessa with a gaze that was entirely stripped of patience. "Mrs. St. James," he said, his voice hard and flat, "we need to be very clear about where we stand. You are operating under the assumption that you hold the medical proxy for Marcus Robinson. Under normal circumstances, you would. You are the mother on the birth certificate, and you have the signed power of attorney from when he was admitted." Vanessa straightened her spine, clutching that invisible shred of authority. "Exactly," she snapped, her voice trembling but gaining volume. "I am his proxy. I make the medical decisions, and I am telling you that I do not authorize this man to touch my son. I do not authorize a transplant from him or Darius until I have spoken to my lawyers. We will find another donor." Dr. Thorne slammed the file down on the desk. The sound cracked like a whip. "There is no other donor," he shouted, losing his professional cool for the first time, "and there is no time for lawyers. Your son is an active failure, Mrs. St. James, and as for your legal standing, let me educate you on hospital policy regarding biological fraud." He pointed a finger at her, and she flinched. "You knowingly falsified medical history. By concealing the use of a donor egg, you blinded this medical team. You compromised patient care. You hid genetic data that we needed to treat him effectively. In the eyes of this hospital's ethics board, that negligence voids your current standing as a decision-maker in this specific crisis." Vanessa gasped. "You can't do that. I will sue this entire building into dust." "You can try," Dr. Thorne said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "But right now, we are operating under emergency protocol for an incapacitated patient. When the primary proxy is deemed unfit or compromised due to conflicting interests, and lying about biological relation is a massive conflict of interest, the decision-making power reverts to the next immediate biological kin." He turned his body away from her. He looked at me. "Ezekiel," he said, using my first name for the first time. "According to the DNA test I just ran, you are the only confirmed biological parent in this room. You are the only person who shares blood with the patient. You are the source. Under the law of lineage and emergency guardianship, you are the one who calls the shots right now." I felt a shiver run down my spine. It wasn't fear. It was the sudden heavy weight of responsibility. For 3 decades I had been told I had no rights. I had been told I was a visitor in my own children's lives. And in the span of 10 minutes, the universe had flipped the table. "So, Doctor," Thorne continued, holding out a pen to me, "the question is not what Mrs. St. James wants. The question is what you want. Do we proceed with the transplant?" I reached for the pen. My hand was steady. "Yes," I said. "We proceed." "No!" Vanessa screamed. She lunged forward, trying to grab the papers off the desk. "You can't! He's trying to kill him! He's trying to steal him!" But before she could touch the documents, a hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. It wasn't me. And it wasn't the doctor. It was Tiffany. My daughter-in-law, the woman who had looked at me like I was a cockroach less than an hour ago, was standing between Vanessa and the desk. Her grip on Vanessa's wrist was tight, her knuckles white. Tiffany wasn't looking at the floor anymore. She was looking at her mother-in-law, and the look on her face was pure, unadulterated survival instinct. Tiffany was a social climber. I knew that. She loved the lifestyle Marcus gave her. She loved the penthouses and the parties. But right now she realized something very simple. If Marcus died, the lifestyle died. If Marcus died, she was just a widow with a mountain of debt and a mother-in-law who was being exposed as a fraud. But if Marcus lived, if Marcus survived this, she needed to be on the winning side. And for the first time in history, the winning side wasn't Vanessa St. James. It was the mechanic in the cheap suit. "Let go of the papers," Vanessa Tiffany said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the hysteria. Vanessa looked at her, shocked. "Tiffany, what are you doing? Let go of me! We have to stop this!" "Stop what?" Tiffany hissed, shoving Vanessa's hand away. "Stop saving my husband. Stop saving your son. Are you insane? Did you not hear the doctor? Marcus has hours left. Hours. And you are worried about your ego. It's not ego, Vanessa cried. It's principle. That man is the only reason Marcus might wake up tomorrow, Tiffany screamed, stepping into Vanessa's face. She looked fierce. The veneer of the polite society wife had cracked, revealing a woman who was terrified of losing everything. Tiffany turned to me. Her eyes were wet, but they were calculating. She looked at the pen in my hand. She looked at the doctor. Then she looked back at Vanessa, who was shrinking against the bookshelf. You lied to us, Tiffany said to Vanessa, her voice shaking with rage. You lied to Marcus. You told me his father was a deadbeat. You told me his genes were bad. We were terrified of having kids because you told us Marcus carried some terrible hereditary weakness from his father. We put off starting a family because of your lies. She took a breath, pointing a finger at Vanessa. But it was you. You were the lie. You aren't even his mother. You're just the vessel. And now you want to let him die rather than admit you lost control. Tiffany turned her back on Vanessa. She looked at me. There was a pause. A heavy, pregnant pause where 30 years of classism and insults hung in the air between us. She knew she had treated me like trash in the hallway. She knew she had blocked me from the wedding. She knew she was guilty. But she also knew who held the power. She stepped toward me. She didn't look at my old shoes. She didn't look at the grease stains on my cuffs. She looked me in the eye and she reached out, placing her hand gently on my arm. Her touch was warm. It was the first time she had ever touched me. Please, she whispered. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was desperation. Sign the papers, she said. I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes. I knew she wasn't doing this for me. She was doing it for herself. She was doing it for Marcus. But right now, that was enough. I looked past her at Vanessa. My ex-wife was slumped against the wall, her face buried in her hands. She was beaten. The Queen of New York had been dethroned by a blood test and a daughter-in-law who knew which way the wind was blowing. I looked back at Tiffany. Move her, I said. My voice was low, but it filled the room. Tiffany didn't hesitate. She turned back to Vanessa. Mom. She stopped herself. She couldn't call her that anymore, not after what she had just learned. Vanessa, move, Tiffany commanded. She grabbed Vanessa by the shoulders and physically steered her away from the desk, pushing her toward the corner of the room like a misbehaving child. Sit down and shut up. Vanessa was too stunned to fight. She let herself be moved. She collapsed into the guest chair, staring blankly at the wall, her world in ashes. Tiffany turned back to me. She gestured to the desk, to the papers, to the doctor, who was watching this power shift with grim satisfaction. She looked at me, and for a second she struggled. She swallowed her pride. She swallowed her prejudice. And then she said the words that sealed Vanessa's defeat. Mom, stay out of the way. She said loud enough for Vanessa to hear, then she looked at me with pleading eyes. Please, Dad, sign the papers. Save him. Dad. The word hung in the air. It was transactional. It was desperate. But it was there. She had acknowledged the hierarchy. She had acknowledged the blood. I walked to the desk. I picked up the pen. It felt light in my hand, but the ink it laid down was permanent. I looked at Dr. Thorne. Where do I sign? I asked. The doctor pointed to the line at the bottom of the page. Right there, Mr. Robinson. This authorizes the emergency conditioning chemotherapy for Marcus and the immediate harvesting of marrow from you. It also grants you temporary medical guardianship until the patient regains consciousness. I pressed the pen to the paper. I wrote my name, Ezekiel Robinson. The letters were jagged, written by a hand that had held pneumatic drills and heavy wrenches for half a century. But they were strong. They were indelible. I put the pen down. It's done, I said. Dr. Thorne grabbed the file instantly. Thank you. I'll alert the team. We prep you in 10 minutes. He rushed out of the room. I stood there for a moment. Tiffany was weeping softly now, leaning against the desk, the adrenaline leaving her body. Vanessa was silent in the corner, a ghost in her own life. I walked over to Tiffany. I didn't hug her. We weren't there yet. Maybe we never would be. But I stood next to her. He's gonna make it, I told her. She looked up at me, wiping her eyes. She nodded. I know, she said, because he's a fighter. Like you. She didn't mention Vanessa. She didn't look at her. She had picked her side. I turned to leave the room to go to the prep area where they would drain the life out of me to give it to my son. I stopped at the door and looked back at Vanessa one last time. You can stay here, Vanessa, I said, or you can go home. It doesn't matter anymore. You can't buy your way into this room. This room is for family. I walked out into the corridor. The hospital lights seemed brighter now. The air seemed cleaner. I was 73 years old. I was broke. I was tired. But as I walked toward the operating theater, I felt 10 feet tall. I was Dad. And that was the only title that mattered. The hospital gown they gave me was thin and open at the back. It was a humiliating garment designed to strip away your dignity and leave you shivering in the cold, processed air of the operating theater. But as I lay on that narrow table, staring up at the blinding white lights, I didn't feel humiliated. I felt like a soldier putting on his armor. The nurses moved around me in a blur of blue scrubs, their voices muffled behind masks, adjusting monitors and checking IV lines. They looked at me with a mixture of professional detachment and hidden pity. They saw an old man, 73 years of broken bones and scar tissue, about to undergo a procedure that would bring men half my age to their knees. They told me the anesthesia would put me under, that I wouldn't feel a thing. But I told the anesthesiologist to keep it light. I didn't want to disappear. I wanted to be present. I wanted to know the exact moment my life left my body and went to save his. "Turn me over, Mr. Robinson," the surgeon said gently. I rolled onto my stomach, exposing my hip. The disinfectant was cold, a shock to the system that made my skin crawl. Then came the pressure. Even with the local numbing agents, I felt it. It was a deep, dull intrusion, the sensation of a large needle piercing through muscle through years of callus seeking the core. When they hit the bone, my body jerked involuntarily. It wasn't sharp pain like a cut. It was a heavy, sickening ache that vibrated through my entire skeleton. It felt like someone was trying to pull the soul right out of my pelvis. I gritted my teeth, clamping my jaw shut so tight I thought a molar might crack. I focused on a spot on the floor, a single scuff mark on the pristine tile. I didn't scream. I didn't whimper. I breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The same way I breathed when I was double shifting at the plant. The same way I breathed when Vanessa served me the divorce papers. Pain is just information, I told myself. Pain means you are alive. And today, pain means Marcus is going to live. As the surgeon began the aspiration, pulling the thick red marrow from my bones, the room started to swim. The physical agony was there, radiant and demanding, but my mind drifted away from it. It traveled back 25 years to a cracked pavement driveway in front of a house I used to call home. I was 35 then. Marcus was 7. He was standing next to a blue bicycle that was slightly too big for him. He was trembling, his little knuckles white as he gripped the handlebars. He was terrified of falling. "Daddy, don't let go," he had pleaded, looking up at me with those big, dark eyes. My eyes. "I won't let go until you're ready." I promised, my hand firm on the back of the seat. We started moving. His legs pumped the pedals, clumsy at first, then finding a rhythm. I ran beside him, my work boots slapping against the concrete, my back bent, my hands stabilizing him. I could smell the autumn leaves and the exhaust from the passing cars. I could hear his breathing, fast and shallow. "Faster. Marcus, keep pedaling," I shouted, laughing. He picked up speed. The wobble in the front wheel smoothed out. I felt the momentum shift. He wasn't leaning on my hand anymore. He was balancing on his own. "I'm doing it, Dad. I'm doing it," he yelled, his face splitting into a grin that outshone the sun. I let go. Just for a second. I let him fly. And then the front door of the house flew open. Vanessa stormed out onto the porch, her face twisted in panic. "Ezekiel." "What are you doing?" she screamed. "He's going to fall. He's going to get hurt. Stop him immediately." Her voice startled Marcus. He looked back at the house, lost his focus, and the bike swerved. He went down hard, scraping his knee on the asphalt. He started to cry, not because he was hurt badly, but because he was scared. Vanessa ran down the steps, pushed me aside, and scooped him up. "I told you he wasn't ready," she hissed at me, clutching him to her chest like a baby. "You're always pushing them too hard. You're going to kill them with your recklessness." She took him inside, slamming the door, leaving me alone in the driveway with the spinning wheel of the bicycle. She stole that victory from him. She stole his resilience. She taught him that falling was a failure, not a lesson. Lying on the operating table, feeling the marrow being sucked out of me, I closed my eyes and whispered into the sterile mask, "I'm fixing it, Marcus. I'm fixing the fall. I'm not letting go this time." While I was lying there, giving pieces of myself to the sun, she tried to claim another surgery was happening in the waiting room, but this one didn't involve anesthesia. It involved the raw, jagged cutting of the truth. Darius told me about it later. He told me every word because he needed to purge the poison from his system. Darius had walked back into the waiting room not to sit down but to corner the woman who had orchestrated this entire tragedy. Vanessa was sitting alone, picking at a loose thread on the sofa, looking like a queen in exile. When she saw Darius, she straightened up, trying to summon the old authority. "Where is your father?" she asked, her voice brittle. "He's doing what you couldn't," Darius replied, standing over her. "He is giving bone marrow. He is enduring pain right now to fix your lie." Vanessa flinched. It wasn't a lie, Darius. It was a choice. A parenting choice. Darius laughed, a harsh sound. "A choice. You chose to buy an egg from a stranger because you were ashamed of your own infertility. Fine. That is sad, and I could almost forgive it. But that's not all you did, is it?" He sat down opposite her, leaning in close. "I saw the donor file, Mom. I made Dr. Thorne show me the non-identifying details before I came back out here." Vanessa went pale. "You had no right." "I had every right," Darius shouted. "It's my DNA. It's my face. And you know what I saw." He lowered his voice to a whisper that was more terrifying than a scream. The donor wasn't just healthy. She wasn't just smart. She was specific. Brazilian model. Green eyes, light skin, wavy hair. Vanessa looked away, refusing to meet his eyes. "You didn't just want a baby," Darius said, his voice trembling with disgust. "You wanted a designer accessory. You went shopping for traits that would erase Dad. You wanted to dilute him. You wanted us to come out with light eyes and good hair so you could parade us around your country club and pretend we weren't really black. You wanted us to be exotic, not African." Vanessa slammed her hand on the armrest. "So what if I did?" she hissed, her facade finally breaking, revealing the ugly truth underneath. "Do you know how hard it is? Do you know how people look at you? I wanted you to have an advantage. I wanted you to fit in. I paid $50,000 for that egg because I wanted you to be beautiful." She looked at Darius with genuine confusion, as if she expected him to thank her. "I was trying to breed the struggle out of you," she said. "I was trying to give you a step up." Darius stared at her. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. "And that is the greatest joke of all, isn't it?" Darius said quietly. "You spent $50,000. You picked the perfect light-skinned model. You tried to engineer us." He pointed to his own face. The dark skin, the broad nose, the deep brown eyes. "And look at us, Mom. Look at Marcus. We don't look like a Brazilian model. We don't have green eyes. We look exactly like Ezekiel Robinson." He leaned back, a bitter smile playing on his lips. "Dad's genes were stronger. His blood was stronger. You tried to wash him out of us with money and science, but he survived. He dominated. Every time you looked at us for 30 years, you had to see his face staring back at you. That must have killed you." Vanessa began to cry. Not the fake tears from the office, but real tears of frustration. It drove her mad. She had tried to curate a masterpiece and nature had overruled her. "It wasn't fair," she whispered like a petulant child. "It wasn't fair. I paid for perfection. You got perfection," Darius said, standing up. "You just didn't recognize it because it looked like the man you hated." He turned his back on her. "I'm going to go wait for my father," he said. "You can stay here and mourn your investment." Back in the operating room, the machine beeped. The surgeon placed a hand on my shoulder. "We are done, Mr. Robinson. We got what we needed. It's a good harvest, very rich." I tried to nod, but my body was heavy, weighed down by the lead blanket of exhaustion. They moved me onto a gurney. My hip felt like it had been shattered, a throbbing center of agony that radiated down my leg. But as they wheeled me out, I saw the bag. It was hanging on an IV pole, swaying gently with the movement of the gurney. A bag of dark red fluid. My marrow. My essence. It was leaving me and going to him. I looked at it and smiled. I was 73. My hands were rough. My bank account was empty. But in that bag was the most valuable thing in the world. It was the truth, and the truth was on its way to set my son free. The recovery room was a blur of beige walls and beeping monitors. When I woke up from the anesthesia, the first thing I felt was the ache in my hip. It was a deep, throbbing pain, like a rusted hinge trying to turn after years of disuse. The nurse told me to stay in bed to rest, to let the heavy drugs wear off. She said I had given a lot of marrow for a man of my age, that my body needed time to rebuild what I had lost. But I didn't care about my body. I didn't care about the bruising or the stiffness. I only cared about the bag of red gold they had taken from me. I needed to see where it went. I needed to see if it worked. I forced myself up. My legs felt like lead and the room spun a little, but I grabbed the IV pole and used it like a crutch. I ignored the protests of the orderly who tried to wheel me back to my room. I told him I wasn't going to a room. I was going to my son. I walked down that hallway, every step a battle against gravity and exhaustion, until I reached the glass wall of the ICU. And there he was, Marcus. He looked small in that big bed surrounded by tubes and wires, his skin pale and translucent. But hanging above him, dripping slowly into his veins, was the bag. It was my blood. It was my life, drop by drop, entering his body, hunting down the sickness, and replacing it with the strength of a survivor. I sat down in the hard plastic chair in the corner of his room. It was uncomfortable. It dug into my back. But I didn't move. I watched the drip. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3. Each one was a prayer. Each one was a promise I was keeping 30 years late. Hours passed. The sun went down and the city lights of New York flickered on outside the window, painting the room in shadows. Vanessa wasn't there. She had retreated to the VIP lounge or perhaps gone home to consult with her lawyers, unable to face the reality of her defeat. Tiffany was there for a while, nervously checking her phone, but eventually she fell asleep on the sofa in the hallway, exhausted by the shifting tides of power. It was just the men. Me, Darius, and Marcus. Darius sat on the other side of the bed. He didn't speak. He just watched his brother breathe. Every now and then he would look at me. His eyes would trace the bandage on my arm, then the heavy dressing on my hip under the hospital gown. He looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and guilt, trying to reconcile the father he had been taught to despise with the man sitting in the chair, bleeding for his family. Sometime around 3 in the morning, the rhythm of the room changed. The monitors beeped a little faster. Marcus stirred. His hand, which had been lying limp on the sheet, twitched. His eyelids fluttered, fighting against the heavy weight of the coma and the chemo. I leaned forward, ignoring the sharp stab of pain in my pelvis. "Marcus," I whispered. His eyes opened. They were glassy at first, unfocused, roaming the ceiling. Then they lowered. They scanned the room. They didn't find the perfectly coiffed hair of his mother. They didn't find the anxious face of his wife. They found me. I was slumped in the chair, wearing a hospital gown over my suit trousers, my face unshaven, my eyes red with fatigue. I must have looked like a wreck, but I was there. "Dad," he croaked. His voice was barely a sound, just a puff of air through dry lips. "I'm here, son," I said, reaching out to cover his hand with mine. My hand was rough, calloused, warm. "I'm right here." He blinked, trying to clear the fog. "What happened? Did it work?" Darius leaned in from the other side. "You made it, brother," he said softly. "You're alive." Marcus looked at Darius, then back at me. He looked at the bandage on my arm. He looked at the IV line running from my body earlier. Confusion knitted his brow. "You," Marcus whispered, looking at me. "You gave the marrow." I nodded. I tried to smile, but my lips were trembling. "I gave what I had, son. But Mom said..." Marcus paused, swallowing hard. "Mom said you weren't a match. She said your health was too poor. She said we were waiting for a donor from the registry." Darius let out a long, shaky breath. He stood up and walked to the foot of the bed. He looked older than he had yesterday. He looked like a man who had seen the world burn down and was trying to build a shelter from the ashes. "Mom lied," Marcus Darius said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the heartbreak underneath. "She lied about everything." Marcus tried to sit up, but he was too weak. "What do you mean? Where is she?" "She's not here," Darius said. "She couldn't be here, not after the truth came out." Darius looked at me, asking for permission to drop the bomb. I nodded slightly. It was his story to tell. It was their brotherhood that needed to heal. Marcus Darius continued, gripping the footboard of the bed. "Dad didn't just give you marrow because he was a volunteer. He gave it to you because he was the only one who could. He is a haploidentical match, a 50% match, because he is our father." Marcus frowned. "I know he's our father." "What are you talking about?" Darius shook his head. "No, you don't understand. We were told our whole lives that we were St. James men, that we got our brains, our looks, our talent from Mom's side, that Dad was just the mistake she made in her 20s. He took a deep breath. But the tests proved something else. Mom isn't our mother, not biologically. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the mechanical hiss of the oxygen machine. Marcus stared at his brother, his eyes wide with disbelief. What he whispered. She used a donor egg, Marcus Darius said, the words falling like stones. She couldn't conceive, so she bought an egg. She chose a donor who looked the way she wanted us to look. She tried to engineer us. She carried us, yes, but she doesn't share a single drop of DNA with us. Darius pointed at me. But him, he shares 50%. He is the only real parent we have. Marcus looked at me. His eyes searched my face. He looked at the shape of my nose, the curve of my jaw, the dark, deep-set eyes that mirrored his own. For 30 years he had looked in the mirror and tried to see Vanessa St. James. He had tried to see the aristocrat. But now, under the harsh hospital lights, he saw the mechanic. And for the first time he realized that the face he saw in the mirror every morning was mine. She knew, Marcus asked, his voice trembling. She knew the whole time. She knew, I said softly. It hurt to speak, but I had to. She knew, Marcus. And she was afraid. She was afraid that if you knew the truth, that you belonged to me more than you belonged to her, you would love me. So she made you hate me. She painted me as a villain to hide the fact that she was a stranger. Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes. They spilled over, running down his temples into the pillow. All those years, he choked out. When I graduated, when I got married, she told me not to invite you. She said you would be uncomfortable. She said you would embarrass us. I squeezed his hand. I didn't care about the wedding, Marcus. I only cared that you were happy. But you wrote, Darius interrupted. Tell him, Dad. Tell him about the cards. I looked down at the floor. It didn't matter now. It matters, Darius insisted. Marcus, he wrote to us. Every birthday, every Christmas. Mom hid the letters. She stole them. She wanted us to think he abandoned us so she could own us completely. Marcus looked at the ceiling, processing the betrayal. The mother he had worshipped, the woman whose approval he had spent his life chasing, was a fabrication. She had bought an egg to curate a legacy, and then she had destroyed a father to protect her investment. He squeezed my hand back. His grip was weak, but it was there. You saved me, he whispered. Even after everything I said to you, even after I let her treat you like dirt, you came here and you saved me. I stood up, wincing as the pain shot through my hip. I leaned over the bed and kissed his forehead. It was the first time I had kissed my son since he was 10 years old. You are my boy Marcus, I said, my voice thick with emotion. There is nothing you could do, nothing you could say that would change that. I made you. I fought for you before you were born, and I will fight for you until I die. That is what a father does. Marcus closed his eyes, the tears flowing freely now. I'm sorry, Dad, he sobbed. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize, I said, brushing the hair back from his forehead. Just get better. That's all I want. Just live. The room fell silent again, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of secrets anymore. It was a clean silence. The truth was out. The poison had been drained. And as I sat back down in that uncomfortable plastic chair watching my two sons look at each other with the realization that they were the only family they truly had, I didn't feel the pain in my hip anymore. I felt lighter than air. I had lost a pint of marrow, but I had gained 2 sons, and that was a trade I would make every single day for the rest of my life. The night was long, but the dawn was coming. And for the first time in a long time, the Robinson men were going to face it together. The sun had barely risen over the Hudson River, casting a pale gray light into the hospital room where I sat watching my son sleep. My hip was throbbing with a dull, persistent ache, a reminder of the marrow I had given, but my heart felt lighter than it had in 30 years. I thought the war was over. I thought the truth had been revealed, the tears had been shed, and the enemy had retreated. I was wrong. Vanessa St. James did not know how to retreat. She only knew how to reload. The door to the recovery room didn't bang open this time. It opened with a smooth, ominous click. Vanessa walked in. She had changed her clothes. Gone was the disheveled pantsuit from the night before. She was wearing a fresh, sharp black dress, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face reapplied with a layer of makeup that looked like armor. She didn't look broken anymore. She looked dangerous, and she wasn't alone. Behind her walked a man who smelled like expensive cologne and litigation. He was holding a briefcase that probably cost more than my truck. This was Mr. Sterling. I recognized him. He was the shark who had represented her during our divorce. He was the man who had painted me as a violent, unstable failure in court 3 decades ago. And trailing behind them, looking uncomfortable and checking his watch, was Richard, her current husband. I didn't stand up. I couldn't have, even if I wanted to, not with my hip the way it was. I just looked at them. "What do you want, Vanessa?" I asked, keeping my voice low so as not to wake Marcus. Vanessa didn't answer me directly. She turned to Mr. Sterling and nodded. Mr. Robinson, the lawyer, began, his voice smooth and oily. "We are here to discuss the terms of the asset reallocation and retroactive compensation regarding the guardianship of Marcus and Darius Robinson." I stared at him. Asset reallocation. My son is lying there recovering from a transplant, and you want to talk about money? This is a serious matter, Mr. Sterling said, opening his briefcase and pulling out a file. It has come to our attention through the recent medical disclosures that you are the sole biological parent of the twins. While this is a touching revelation, it also changes the financial history of the last 30 years. He handed me a paper. I didn't take it. Vanessa stepped forward, a cold, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She thought she had found a loophole. She thought she had found a way to win even when she had lost. "You see, Ezekiel," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "For 30 years I have supported these boys. I paid for their food. I paid for their shelter. I paid for their education. I paid for everything. And I did so under the assumption that I was their mother." She paused, waiting for the knife to twist. "But since Dr. Thorne has so helpfully proved that I am not their biological mother, that means I have been raising your children for you. I have been acting as a glorified nanny. And nannies get paid, Ezekiel. But they don't pay for the children's expenses. That is the father's job." I looked at her, stunned by the sheer audacity of her greed. "You want me to pay you back?" Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "We are calculating the total cost of raising 2 children in the St. James lifestyle over 30 years. Private schools, luxury vacations, medical bills, university tuition. With interest, we estimate the debt you owe Mrs. St. James to be in the realm of $4 million. He smiled, a shark, showing his teeth. "Since you obviously do not have $4 million, Mr. Robinson, we are prepared to offer a settlement. You will sign over full, permanent legal guardianship of the twins back to Mrs. St. James. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the biological details of their birth. And you will disappear. If you do this, we will forgive the debt." I looked at Richard. He was looking at the floor, clearly ashamed, but unwilling to cross his wife. "So that's it," I said, looking Vanessa in the eye. "You can't own them by blood, so you want to buy them back with a lawsuit. You want to blackmail me into leaving their lives again?" "It's not blackmail," Vanessa said, inspecting her fingernails. "It's business. You are a poor man, Ezekiel. You can't fight this in court. Mr. Sterling will bury you. Just sign the papers and go back to your garage. It's better for everyone." I sat there for a moment. The room was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of Marcus's monitor. I reached into the back pocket of my hospital gown. It was empty. I looked around and saw my old leather wallet sitting on the bedside table where the nurse had put my personal effects. "Hand me my wallet," I said to Darius, who had just woken up in the chair next to me and was watching this scene with wide, horrified eyes. Darius grabbed the wallet and handed it to me. His hands were shaking. He looked ready to fight, ready to throw them out, but I put a hand on his arm to calm him. "I don't need to fight, son," I whispered. "I just need to read." I opened the wallet. It was cracked and worn, held together by duct tape in one corner. Inside, tucked behind a picture of my mother, was a folded piece of paper. It was yellowed with age. The creases were so deep the paper was almost tearing apart. I had carried this paper for 30 years. I had carried it like a curse, a reminder of the day I lost everything. I unfolded it slowly. My hands were trembling not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a soldier who realizes he has been holding the winning grenade the entire time. "Mr. Sterling," I said, smoothing the paper out on my lap. "Do you remember the divorce settlement? The one you drafted in 1994? Mr. Sterling frowned. "I draft many settlements, Mr. Robinson. I assume it was standard." "No," I said. It wasn't standard. Vanessa insisted on a special clause. She was paranoid. She was so afraid that I would try to get out of paying alimony or child support that she made you add a specific paragraph about fraud. I looked at Vanessa. She frowned, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "You remember, don't you, Vanessa?" I asked. "You screamed at me in the lawyer's office. You said, 'I want to make sure you never try to deny these kids are yours. I want to make sure you pay for every cent.'" I looked down at the paper and began to read. My voice was raspy, but it filled the room. Article 4, Section B, Paragraph 2. Regarding the legitimacy of offspring. If either party is found to have knowingly falsified, concealed, or defrauded the other party regarding the biological lineage, paternity or maternity of the children named Marcus and Darius Robinson for the purpose of securing financial support or custody. I paused. Mr. Sterling's face had gone the color of spoiled milk. He knew the clause. He had written it. Then the party found in violation of this truth shall forfeit all claims to marital assets, alimony, and child support previously awarded. Furthermore, I looked up at Vanessa. She was frozen. Her mouth was slightly open, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Furthermore, I read, reading the words that were about to destroy her life. The violating party shall be liable for the repayment of all financial support received from the defrauded spouse plus punitive damages for emotional distress and marital fraud. I folded the paper and placed it gently on the bed. "You wrote that clause, Vanessa," I said softly. "You wrote it because you thought I would lie. You thought I would claim the boys weren't mine to save money. You never thought that 30 years later science would prove that you were the one lying." I turned to Mr. Sterling. By concealing the use of a donor egg, Vanessa committed fraud against the marriage contract. She claimed she was the biological mother to secure full custody and higher alimony payments. I paid child support for 18 years based on that contract. I paid alimony for 10 years based on that contract. I looked at the lawyer, whose arrogant smile had completely vanished. "So, Mr. Sterling, by your own math, if we calculate the payments I made plus the punitive damages your client insisted on including in this contract, I don't owe her $4 million. I pointed at Vanessa. "She owes me everything." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging in the air. Vanessa tried to speak, but only a squeak came out. That doesn't apply. Mr. Sterling closed his briefcase. He closed it quickly, snapping the latches shut. He didn't look at Vanessa. He looked at the door. "Is this true?" Richard asked. His voice was quiet, terrified. He stepped forward, looking at the lawyer. "Sterling, is this true? Does that clause exist?" Mr. Sterling adjusted his tie, sweat beading on his forehead. It was a standard protection clause at the time, Richard. Mrs. St. James insisted on it. Technically, under the strict letter of the contract, if she is not the biological mother and she concealed it, yes, it applies. Richard turned to Vanessa. He looked at her like she was a stranger, like she was a contagion. "You committed marital fraud," he asked, "and you dragged me here to extort a dying boy's father." "Richard, wait," Vanessa pleaded, grabbing his arm. "It's not like that. We can fight it. We have the money." "I don't have the money," Richard shouted, pulling his arm away violently. "Not for this. My firm has a morality clause. Vanessa, if the press finds out my wife defrauded her ex-husband about the biology of her children and then tried to sue him while their son was in a coma, I will be ruined. My investors will pull out. I will lose everything." He backed away from her, shaking his head. "I'm done," he said. "I'm filing for divorce in the morning. I'm not going down with this ship." "Richard," Vanessa screamed, chasing him to the door. "Richard, come back. You can't leave me." Richard walked out the door without looking back. Mr. Sterling looked at me, then at the floor. He muttered something about a conflict of interest and needing to review the files, and then he scurried out after Richard, leaving Vanessa standing alone in the center of the room. She stood there for a long time. The hallway light framed her silhouette, but she looked smaller now. The armor was gone. The money was gone. The husband was gone. She turned slowly to look at me. Her eyes were empty. There was no fight left in them. "You planned this," she whispered. "You kept that paper for 30 years. I shook my head. "I didn't plan anything, Vanessa. I kept that paper because it was the only thing I had left of us. I kept it because I thought one day maybe you would be fair." I reached out and took Marcus's hand. He was awake, watching his mother with tears in his eyes. "You didn't lose because of me," I told her. "You lost because you bet against the truth. and the truth always wins eventually. Vanessa looked at her sons. She looked at Marcus, frail but alive. She looked at Darius standing guard by his brother's side. Neither of them moved toward her. Neither of them spoke. They had seen the contract, they had seen the greed, and they had made their choice. She let out a sob, a broken, jagged sound, and turned around. She walked out of the hospital room, her heels clicking on the linoleum, but the sound was different now. It wasn't the sound of a queen marching into battle. It was the sound of a woman walking into a very long, very lonely winter. I watched her go. Then I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and listened to the steady, rhythmic beating of my son's heart. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. And it was free. 3 months passed since the day the truth shattered our world in that hospital room. The leaves outside my small house in Queens had turned from green to brown, and the wind coming off the river had a bite to it. My hip was still stiff in the mornings. The doctors said it would take a year to fully heal, but I didn't mind the limp. Every time I took a step and felt that twinge of pain, I smiled. It was a reminder that my marrow was out there walking around in the world, pumping life into the son who had almost slipped away. I was in the garage, of course. It was a Saturday. The garage was my sanctuary, a cluttered cathedral of grease metal and memories. It smelled of oil and old rubber, a scent that Vanessa used to say made her nauseous. But to me, it smelled like honest work. I was tinkering with the fuel pump of the '78 Ford, the truck that Vanessa had threatened to take in the divorce but ultimately left because she deemed it trash. I heard a car pull up the gravel driveway. It wasn't the mailman. The engine was too quiet, too smooth. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked to the door. I expected a salesman. I expected maybe a neighbor. I didn't expect to see a black sedan parked next to my rusted chain-link fence. And I certainly didn't expect to see who stepped out of it. It was Marcus. He was thinner than before, his hair just starting to grow back in soft, fuzzy patches after the chemo, but he was standing on his own 2 feet. Next to him was Darius, looking less like a Wall Street shark and more like a brother wearing jeans that looked brand new and stiff. And behind them, carrying a Tupperware container, was Tiffany. I stood in the doorway of my garage wearing my stained coveralls. I didn't rush to greet them. I didn't want to spook them. They looked nervous, like travelers entering a foreign country without a map. They walked up the driveway, their expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. They stopped 10 feet away. "Hey, Dad," Marcus said. His voice was stronger now. It sounded like mine. "Hey, son," I replied. I leaned against the doorframe. "You looking for directions?" Marcus smiled, a small, shy thing. "No. We were looking for lunch." Tiffany made a casserole. We thought you might be hungry." I looked at Tiffany. The last time I saw her, she was screaming at Vanessa to get out of the way. Today she looked different. She wasn't wearing the 6-inch heels, she was wearing flats. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked at me, and then she looked down at the ground, a gesture of respect I hadn't seen from her in years. "I'm always hungry," I said, stepping back and opening the door wide. "Come on in." They walked into my house. It wasn't a mansion. The linoleum in the kitchen was peeling in the corner. The sofa was 20 years old. The TV was small, but it was warm. And everywhere you looked, there were pictures of them. Darius stopped at the mantelpiece. He picked up a framed photo of 2 little boys in baseball uniforms grinning with missing teeth. He ran his thumb over the glass. "You kept this?" Darius asked quietly. "Mom told us you threw all our stuff away when you moved out." I walked over to the fridge and pulled out a pitcher of iced tea. "I never threw anything away, Darius. I just waited for the owners to come back and claim it." We ate lunch at my small kitchen table. The casserole was good. It tasted like effort. We didn't talk about Vanessa. We didn't talk about the lawsuit or the millions of dollars she was now scrambling to pay back. That was a dead world. We talked about the Knicks. We talked about the weather. We talked about the traffic on the bridge. It was the small, awkward, beautiful talk of men learning how to be a family again. After lunch, Tiffany started clearing the table. I moved to help her, but she stopped me. "Sit down, Dad," she said softly. "I got this. You rest that hip." I looked at her. There was no mockery in her voice, no condescension. She was pouring water into the kettle to make hot tea. She moved around my cramped kitchen with a humility that suited her better than any designer dress. She had seen the edge of the cliff. She had almost lost her husband to a lie, and now she found comfort in the simple truth of dirty dishes and boiling water. I left her to it and walked out the back door to the garage. I needed air. I needed to touch something solid. A minute later, the screen door slammed. I didn't turn around. I knew who it was. The footsteps were heavy. Marcus walked up beside me. He leaned against the workbench, looking at the dismantled carburetor spread out on a blue shop towel. It was a complex mess of springs, valves, and gaskets. Most people looked at it and saw junk. "That's the heart of the engine, isn't it?" Marcus asked. I nodded. "The carburetor. It mixes the air and the fuel. Get the mixture wrong, the engine chokes. Get it right, and she sings." Marcus reached out and picked up a heavy wrench. He held it in his hand, weighing it. His hands were pale, his fingers long and slender piano player hands, Vanessa used to say. But as he gripped the steel, I saw the tendons flex. I saw the strength that had been dormant. "I never learned how to fix anything," Marcus said, staring at the tool. "Mom. She always just hired people. If a light bulb went out, we called a guy. If the sink leaked, we called a guy. I don't know how to change a tire. I don't know how to jump-start a battery." He looked up at me. His eyes were wet. "I feel useless, Dad. I'm 35 years old, and I don't know how to keep my own world running." I took a rag and wiped a smudge of grease off the fender. "You aren't useless, Marcus. You just had the wrong teacher. You were taught that power comes from a checkbook. But checkbooks run out." I tapped the wrench in his hand. "This doesn't run out. Skill doesn't run out." Marcus looked at the carburetor again. He took a deep breath. He didn't launch into a speech. He didn't fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness for the years of silence. We were men. We didn't need to reopen the wound to heal it. We just needed to build something new over the scar. "Show me," he said. I looked at him. "Show you what?" "Show me how it works," Marcus said. He pointed to the brass needle valve with the tip of the wrench. "Show me how to fix it. I want to get my hands dirty. I want to be like you." I felt a lump form in my throat, hard and tight. I swallowed it down. I picked up a screwdriver. "All right," I said, my voice gruff to hide the emotion. "But I warn you, this isn't Wall Street. You strip a bolt here, you can't talk your way out of it. You have to drill it out." Darius walked in then. He had taken off his expensive watch and rolled up his sleeves. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed a shop stool and pulled it up to the other side of the workbench. He picked up a rag and started cleaning a spark plug. "We've got time," Darius said. "We aren't going anywhere." So we worked. For the next 3 hours, the three of us stood in that drafty garage. I taught them the difference between a flathead and a Phillips. I taught them how to listen to the engine, how to feel the vibration of the metal. I watched my sons, the boys, who were supposed to be too good for this life, hunch over the fender of a 40-year-old truck, sweating, cursing when a nut wouldn't turn, and laughing when it finally broke free. They had grease on their faces. They had oil under their fingernails. And for the first time in their lives, they looked like Robinson men. Tiffany came out later carrying a tray. She had made tea. Not the fancy herbal stuff she used to drink, but strong, sweet black tea in chipped mugs. She set the tray down on a stack of tires. She didn't wrinkle her nose at the smell of exhaust. She walked over to Marcus and wiped a smear of oil from his cheek with her thumb. "You look a mess," she said, smiling. "I feel great," Marcus replied. He looked at me. "Dad says if we get this valve seated right, we can fire it up before sunset." Tiffany looked at me. She picked up a mug and held it out. "Here, Dad," she said. "I made it strong, just how you like it." I took the mug. The ceramic was warm in my hands. I looked around my garage. It was messy, it was loud, it was crowded, and it was perfect. Vanessa was gone. She was in a penthouse somewhere, surrounded by lawyers and silence. She had kept the money or what was left of it, but she had lost the war. She had tried to buy a legacy, but you can't buy what grows in the blood. I took a sip of the tea. It was sweet. "Let's fire her up," I said. Marcus got in the driver's seat. Darius stood by the hood. I leaned in and manually engaged the throttle linkage. "Turn it," I commanded. Marcus turned the key. The starter whined, that high-pitched complaint of an old machine waking up. "Give it gas," I shouted. He pumped the pedal, and then, roar. The V8 engine caught life. It didn't purr, it growled. It shook the concrete floor. It filled the garage with smoke and noise and power. Marcus revved it, his face lighting up with a joy so pure it looked like he was 7 years old again, riding that bike without training wheels. Darius was high-fiving him through the window. Tiffany was clapping her hands. I stood back and watched them. My family, my boys. They weren't perfect. We had lost 30 years. We had scars that would never fully fade. But as the engine roared, drowning out the silence of the past, I knew one thing for sure. The line was secure. The blood had returned to the source. And the Robinson name wasn't going to die with me. It was just getting started. The lawyers told me I could destroy her. They sat at my kitchen table, their expensive briefcases looking out of place on the peeling linoleum, and they laid it all out. They said I could sue Vanessa for 30 years of back pay. They said I could sue her for emotional distress, for fraud, for the alienation of affection. They said I could take the penthouse, the summer home in the Hamptons, and the portfolio of stocks she used to dangle over my head like a carrot. They told me I could leave her destitute, living in a studio apartment, wondering how to pay the electric bill. I looked at the papers. I looked at the numbers that represented a lifetime of lies. And then I looked out the window at my backyard where Darius was raking leaves, and Marcus was sitting on the porch steps laughing at something his brother said. I picked up the pen and I drew a line through the settlement offer. I told the lawyers to go home. I didn't sue Vanessa. I didn't take her money. I didn't drag her through the mud of a public trial. Not because I forgave her. Forgiveness is a heavy thing, and I wasn't ready to carry it yet. I didn't sue her because taking her money would mean acknowledging that her money had value. It would mean admitting that the currency she used to buy my children was worth fighting for. It wasn't. And besides, I knew that leaving her with her millions was a far greater punishment than taking them away. If I took her money, she would be a victim. She would have a story to tell her society friends about the greedy ex-husband who ruined her. But by leaving her with everything and taking only the boys, I left her with the silence. I imagine her sometimes sitting in that pristine white living room that looks like a museum exhibit. She has her art. She has her view of the park. She has her bank accounts. But the phone doesn't ring. There are no birthday dinners. There are no grandchildren running through the halls. She is the queen of a silent kingdom surrounded by the echoes of the lie that finally collapsed on top of her. She has to live every day knowing that the inferior man she despised is the one enjoying the richness of a family she couldn't buy. That is a prison no judge could sentence her to. That is a hell of her own making. My life, on the other hand, got loud. It is a Saturday afternoon in late October. The air is crisp, smelling of dried leaves and wood smoke. My backyard isn't much to look at compared to the estates my sons grew up in. The grass is a little patchy, and the fence leans to the left. But today it feels like the center of the universe. I am standing at the grill, an old oil drum I converted into a smoker years ago. The ribs are sizzling, dripping fat onto the coals, sending up clouds of smoke that smell like heaven. I am wearing my grill master apron, a gift from Tiffany, and I am basting the meat with my secret sauce, a recipe Vanessa used to call peasant food, but which Marcus now requests every single weekend. Marcus is sitting at the picnic table. He has gained 20 pounds since the surgery. His cheeks are full and his hair has grown back thick and dark. He is holding a beer in one hand and a wrench in the other, explaining to Tiffany how he replaced the alternator in his sedan yesterday. He isn't afraid of dirt anymore. He wears the grease on his knuckles like a badge of honor. Darius is standing next to me holding the platter for the meat. He has loosened his tie. He doesn't wear the linen suits much anymore. He looks relaxed. He looks like a man who has finally stopped holding his breath. "Hey, Dad," Darius says, bumping my shoulder with his. "You think they're ready? I'm starving." I look at the meat. The bones are pulling back. The bark is dark and caramelized. "Patience, son," I say, smiling. "You can't rush the good stuff." He laughs. It is a deep, booming laugh. It sounds exactly like mine. I look at them, my two boys. For 30 years I was told they were St. James men. I was told they were refined elite different. But standing here in the smoke of my backyard, the truth is undeniable. They are Robinson men. They have my broad shoulders, they have my wide smile, they have the resilience that comes from a long line of survivors who knew how to make something out of nothing. Vanessa tried to breed me out of them. She tried to dilute my history with a donor egg and a checkbook. But biology is stubborn. The blood is stubborn. In the end, her science experiment failed. The Robinson genes dominated. We are 3 black men standing in a circle of smoke and laughter bound by a code that can't be rewritten in a lab. Tiffany walks over and puts her arm around Marcus. She looks happy. She looks real. She waves at me and I wave back with my tongs. This is my inheritance. I don't have a trust fund to leave them. I don't have a summer house to bequeath. But I gave them life. I gave them the marrow that flows in their veins, and now I am giving them the truth. I pile the ribs onto the platter. Darius takes it and we walk over to the table together. We sit down. We hold hands. Marcus bows his head. Thank you, God, for this food. Marcus says, his voice thick with emotion. And thank you for this time. Thank you for the truth. And thank you for our Father. We say amen. We eat. We laugh until our sides hurt. And as the sun goes down over Queens, casting a golden light on the faces of my children, I realize that I am the richest man in the world. Vanessa can keep the castle. I have the kingdom. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. However, lies are a debt that truth will always collect with interest. Vanessa spent a lifetime building a castle on the sand of deception, thinking she could engineer love and rewrite biology. She forgot that nature has its own justice. In the end, the inferior genes she despised were the only ones strong enough to save the life she claimed to own. A title can be bought, a facade can be constructed, but the sacrificial love of a father is the only authentic legacy that survives the storm. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe that truth is stronger than money, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. And tell me in the comments, have you ever discovered a secret that changed your family forever? I will be reading your answers. Until next time, keep fighting for the truth.